welcome to this week's Hocus Focus. I'm Sara Mondaini.
And I'm Thomas Sheridan.
And thank you for joining us this evening. And we have another thrilling show lined up with a throwback 40th theme as the second topic tonight. And we appreciate everyone who approached last week's discussion on Marina Abramovich with an open mind. And it's always refreshing to engage in mature conversations about topics that might initially make us uncomfortable. And remember, someone having an interest in something that others may not like or approve of isn't sufficient reason to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And to those who chose to unsubscribe due to last week's topic, we can only echo these timeless words of the poet John Lydgate and President Lincoln. You can please some of the people all of the time. You can please all of the people some of the time, but you can't please all of the people all of the time. Such is the nature of diverse perceptions and interests. And Thomas, how have you been since last week?
I've been absolutely fantastic. Of course, I'm very busy this time of year, but absolutely floating, getting things done. It's a bit messy today. I had a few kind of retrograde-y things, Mercury kind of things breaking, but I can't complain really. I'm looking forward to getting this all out of the way so we can get back to a regular schedule after Christmas.
Yeah, you've got a talk coming up, haven't you, in a couple of weeks?
Yeah, 17th November it's in County Kerry. I forget the name of the town. It's near Kenmare. It's actually in the middle of nowhere in the mountains. But that'll be the 17th, is a Sunday of November.
Right.
The details are on my Substack.
Anyway, for tonight's first topic, we are looking into the lives and crimes of notorious serial killers, such as the Night Stalker, the Zodiac Killer, Son of Sam, and the Yorkshire Ripper, amongst others, and to look at their connections to the occult. And we'll talk about how their broken childhoods, in most of the cases, led them to some strange and dark ideologies, and how certain aspects of the occult influence their actions and beliefs. And we're also looking at why some individuals with an interest in the occult choose such a dark and destructive path. Now, in regards to the serial killers that we talk about tonight, I feel it's important to say that I'm not really going to go into any great detail of the actual murders that took place unless it's necessary to the story, more as tonight's topic is about what drives these people to do what they did. And I'm going to start off with Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, who we briefly touched upon last week when we covered the Cecil Hotel. And he terrorized Southern California in the 1980s and was a self-proclaimed Satanist who often left inverted pentagrams at crime scenes, which is a symbol often associated with Satanism. And these symbols were etched into walls and into the victims, and it heightened the fear and mystery of the communities that he terrorized. Ramirez believed that his acts were offerings to Satan, and he expected these sacrifices to grant him some kind of power and immortality. Now, his childhood was full of difficulties, and his father, Julian Ramirez, was a former police officer in Mexico, and he struggled with alcoholism, which led to quite a turbulent family life. And Julian's behaviour included both physical and emotional abuse directed at the family, including Richard Ramirez and his siblings. His volatile temper and violent tendencies created a long, dark shadow over the young Ramirez's formative years, perhaps even setting the stage for the dark path that he would later find himself upon. And psychiatrist Michael Stone had an interesting perspective on Ramirez's psychological makeup. And he said that Ramirez is a made psychopath as opposed to a born one. And he believes that Ramirez's early life experiences were fundamental in shaping his disturbed personality. And according to Stone, Ramirez had numerous brushes with death before the age of 6, during which he was knocked unconscious on multiple occasions. And those early traumas are believed to have had a big impact on Ramirez's development, leading to something called temporal lobe epilepsy, heightened aggressiveness, and hypersexuality. Now, I believe there is the possibility that Ramirez may also have been possessed by something. And when you look at the archival footage of his trial, there are moments when it seems as if his appearance transforms and his face changes slightly, and another worldly presence seems to come to the forefront and then disappear again. And in one documentary that I watched, I think it was the Netflix documentary from a couple of years ago, there was an account from either Frank Salerno or one of the younger detectives who were closely involved with the case. And according to their recollection, during the interviews with Ramirez, there was a moment when he seemed to levitate from his chair. And this frightened those who saw it. And the detective said that since then, he said his prayers every night to this day. And he also said that this was why he was against capital punishment for people like Ramirez, and that life imprisonment was a better solution, because when a malevolent entity takes over a person, life imprisonment kind of traps the entity within the killer's body until the end of their natural life, whereas capital punishment is releasing this dark force and allowing it to find another host, continuing the cycle of violence. You can't contain it forever, he said, but you can stop it for a little while. And then moving on to the Zodiac Killer. And the Zodiac Killer, whose identity remains a mystery to this day, was an elusive serial killer who operated in Northern California during the late 1960s and early 1970s. His signature modus operandi involved sending cryptic ciphers and symbols in letters to both the media and the police. And what is particularly chilling about this one is that it wasn't the law enforcement or the media who bestowed him with the ominous moniker. Instead, it was the killer himself who claimed the title, the Zodiac Killer. In a letter dated August 1969, he stated, "This is the Zodiac speaking," and that birthed the name that would become synonymous with one of the most elusive serial killers in history. And the Zodiac Killer sent these series of taunting letters and cards to regional newspapers, including the San Francisco Chronicle. And in these correspondences, he made really bad threats of killing sprees and bombings, which were all dependent on whether the newspapers would publish his messages or not. And the killer claimed that when he was gathering victims, he was doing it for them to serve as slaves in the afterlife. And he signed his letters using a symbol. And this symbol is often identified as the sun cross or the cardinal cross. And the sun cross, which is the cross within a circle, is also a planetary symbol for Earth. And in his final letter to the San Francisco Chronicle, it was postmarked January the 29th, 1974. And in that letter, he praised the movie The Exorcist as being the best satirical comedy that he'd ever seen. And he murdered at least 5 people during the late 1960s, but authorities believe he may have killed as many as 30 people. Except for the murder of the lone taxi driver, all his documented attacks seem to target couples. Now, he could be alive, he could be dead, he could be in prison for something else, or he could still be walking free. And there are also theories out there that it might not even be one person, but multiple people whose crimes were grouped together, which leads me on to the astrological murders, which were allegedly committed in the same state and around the same time as the Zodiac. And police in Northern California made a connection between a single culprit and possibly at least a dozen unsolved homicides at that time. And all of the alleged victims were female, and they were linked by the fact that they were dumped in ravines and killed in conjunction with astrological events such as the winter solstice and the equinoxes, and even on some occasions, Friday the 13th. Now, the Zodiac was also suspected of being behind the so-called Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders, in which at least 7 female hitchhikers were all murdered in Sonoma County and Santa Rosa in 1972 and 1973. And then we have the son of Sam, also known as David Berkowitz, and he's an American serial killer who was famously known and pleaded guilty to 8 shootings that began in New York City on the 29th of July, 1976. And Berkowicz's descent into his dark path began with his belief that a demon named Sam was commanding him to commit acts of violence. And he claimed that this malevolent entity spoke to him through the barking of his neighbour's dog, which he believed to be a conduit for Sam's demonic instructions. David Berkowicz's account of the Son of Sam murders took another chilling turn when he began claiming that he'd become involved with a satanic cult in the spring of 1975. And this revelation came out in 1993 when Berkowicz announced to the press that he was responsible for only 3 of the Son of Sam murders. And in his new version of events, he insisted that there were other shooters involved, and he had fired the gun only in the first attack and the 6th attack. And according to Berkowicz, he had several other cult members with him who played roles in each incident, such as planning the events, conducting surveillances on the victims, and acting as lookouts and drivers at the crime scene. And he also claimed that revealing the names of most of his accomplices would put his family directly at risk, so he wouldn't disclose any of the identities. And while in prison, Berkowicz continued to expand upon his claims of demonic possession, and in a series of 9 videos in 2015, he said that the voice he had heard was that of Samhain, a druid devil, and that this entity was the true origin of the Son of Sam. And in these statements, he also refuted the notion that the voice he heard was associated with a dog, and he insisted that this detail was fabricated by the media. And then in prison, he became a born-again Christian and has since expressed remorse for his actions. And he's been sharing his journey toward redemption on Christian websites. And in more mainstream news outlets, he's also spoken out against gun violence. Now, whether Berkowicz's remorse is genuine or motivated by his desire to improve his chances of parole, which comes about every 2 years, is debatable. It's difficult to see the true motives behind his expressions of remorse and his newfound faith. Some might think it's genuine, but is it more likely a reason to improve his chances of release? And next, I want to talk about the Process Church, which was a fringe religious group founded in the 1960s and has been associated with several serial killers, including Charles Manson and David Berkowicz. While the Process Church didn't explicitly endorse violence, its unconventional beliefs made it a breeding ground for dark ideologies. And some of the members of the Process Church may have been drawn to this environment due to personal struggles, looking for answers in an alternative belief system, while others may have been drawn in by the dark and taboo nature of it. And in the counterculture of the 1960s and 70s, where unconventional spiritual groups thrived, the Process Church offered a path that challenged the traditional norms of the times. And the church's beliefs were a mixture of various spiritual and esoteric traditions. And it had a kind of unique framework which was founded on the idea that there is the existence of 4 gods who were seen not as entities but as inner realities which existed in each human personality. And these gods were not worshipped, and they were known as Jehovah, Lucifer, Satan, and Christ. And they were referred to as the great gods of the universe. And the church stated that Jehovah is strength, Lucifer is light, Satan is separation, and Christ is unification. And each member was instructed to follow the god or gods which were best suited to their personality. And this coming together of good and evil, light and darkness, appealed to a select group of individuals who were drawn to the group's unorthodox interpretations of spirituality. Now, I'm going to say here that it's important to note that not all members of the Process Church were involved in criminal activities, and the group itself denied any direct involvement in any violence. But nevertheless, the Process Church's existence and associations with those notorious figures does show how dark, unconventional ideologies personal struggles, and the glamorization of the dark side can be a potent cocktail that draws a certain individual into a world of sinister intent. And it shows the power of fringe religious groups to influence and sometimes warp the minds of their members. And it can unintentionally encourage some damaged people towards the darkest and most destructive of paths. And I'm going to finish this section with Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper. He's the last one I want to highlight tonight. And Peter Sutcliffe was known as the Yorkshire Ripper, and he terrorised England during the late 1970s. And Sutcliffe's early life was also characterised by a violent family environment. His father, John Sutcliffe, was an alcoholic whose bouts of anger frequently erupted into violence. And an especially disturbing incident happened when Sutcliffe was just 5 years old during a Christmas gathering. And in a fit of rage, his father shattered a beer glass over the young boy's head, all because he dared to sit in his father's chair at the dining table. But his father's animosity went way beyond his son. He had a loathing for his wife, referring to her as a bitch, and he would belittle Sutcliffe, describing him as a wimp who was always clinging to his mother's apron strings, a classic mummy's boy. And in 1970, the father orchestrated an event that left a lasting impact on Sutcliffe and his brothers and sisters, and he posed as his wife's lover to trick her into coming to a local hotel, where he brought along Sutcliffe and 2 other children to witness his wife's perceived infidelity. And when Kathleen arrived, John Sutcliffe pulled a negligee from her bag while her children watched on in horror at the humiliation. Dr. Nixon is a psychologist, and he emphasised the significance of this traumatic incident, explaining how it laid the foundation for the events that would follow. And Sutcliffe's father also believed that even perfect women could not be trusted, and he painted them all as untrustworthy and deceitful and undeserving of having any respect. And he taught this to his son as well. And his father later recalled the effect that this event had on his son. And he said that the boy stood there visibly shaken, wearing an expression that seemed to mirror an animal's fear and distress. And this incident, which took place in the hotel, does seem to have played a major part in distorting Sutcliffe's perception of women and relationships and the dark path that his life would also take. And as a consequence of all this in his childhood, during Sutcliffe's late adolescence, he then developed an obsession with voyeurism, and he'd spend a lot of time secretly observing prostitutes and the men who would seek their services. Sutcliffe's modus operandi involved brutally attacking and murdering multiple women that terrorised whole communities, and he often targeted women in red light districts. And that suggests that Sutcliffe may have been motivated by a desire to rid the world of what he saw as morally corrupt individuals. His choice of victims could be seen as an attempt to play the role of a self-righteous punisher, just like his father. Furthermore, during the investigation, Sutcliffe claimed that he was instructed by the voice of God to commit these murders. Now, the British DJ and TV presenter Jimmy Savile was also a suspect in these crimes, although that's only become public recently. And this was something Thomas had been saying for many years before it became mainstream. The police initially had taken a cast of the DJ's teeth after teeth marks were found on Irene Richardson's body, which was discovered just a few hundred yards from one of Savile's properties. And there were even members of the public identifying him as a possible suspect. But as with the whole Sutcliffe case, it was a wild goose chase. And I'm going to let Thomas go into that in more detail when he speaks. But in my opinion, Savile was absolutely an adept black magician, and he had put a spell on the public. And at one point, it was almost as if he could do no wrong. And he even self-portrayed himself as the people's champion. Anyway, as I've said, I'm going to let Thomas take the stage on that because he spent many years researching that, and it's been a big part of his work. So just to finish my section on this, why serial killers and the occult? Well, certain individuals may be drawn to its darker aspects as a means of asserting power and control over others. The left-hand path side of the occult often focuses on individualism, rebellion, and power and the opportunity to break free from convention, which in and of themselves are very useful and strong characteristics to have. But as with anything, when taken to the extreme with no discernment, it can also become an attractive option for those who seek to defy and engage in forbidden acts. Serial killers who dabble in the occult may see it as a way to gain a sense of authority over life and death. And while it's important to avoid generalizations about individuals who explore the occult and the left-hand path, I mean, it's a topic that both Thomas and myself are deeply interested in. But in the cases of the Night Stalker, the Zodiac Killer, the Son of Sam, Peter Sutcliffe, and Jimmy Savile, it shows that some people with a fascination for it may be more prone to violent tendencies, driven by a warped belief in dark powers and a desire for control. So what are your thoughts on all that, Thomas?
Well, there's an enormous amount to unpack in that, Sarah. Once I've been, as you just mentioned, I've been studying this topic for years and quite deeply, right back to when I was a young teenager, actually. And you have to be very careful how we look at these things when we're dealing with these serial killers. You have different stages. First, you have the actual murders themselves committed by this individual or individuals in the case of Hindley and Brady. Then you have the police arresting, the court case, the prosecution, the evidence, and all that part of it. And then you have also, from that, what you have then is the mythology that develops from that. And often that's the case if it's like a serialized, in the old days, a serialized newspaper special by some writer, a book, quite often, documentaries on TV, and these days YouTube channels, that kind of thing. Now, often the mythologizing is where the sort of strange, the high strangeness of the act of the serial killing comes in. The tendency for people to find unusual things or events within the cases and amplify them into the extreme. Sometimes they're true, sometimes they're not. Now, I have a long time ago, before I even got into this stuff, I had a fascination with the Son of Sam killings, going back to when I was a teenager. And I can remember why I got into it. I was waiting to go to a football match in Ireland at night, and we're standing online, and some guy was reading a newspaper to get into the stadium, and it said an Irishman has caught Son of Sam. I was really young. I was about 12 or 13, I think, then when that happened. And it just stuck with me. He was an Irish copper in New York who caught Berkowitz. So then I took an interest in Berkowitz casually, whatever I could find back then. And when I moved to New York when I was about 19, 20, the first place I got to find a place to live was up in the North Bronx in Riverdale, on the border with Yonkers, which is the next city up from New York, just over the North Bronx border. And that was Berkowitz country. That was Process Church country. That was where it all took place. And I went to Ottomar Park, and I went to Van Cortlandt Park, and I went around all these places, and I did find what you would call evidence of satanic rituals. They're quite, even though they're parks, they're quite wild. Like Riverdale Park has a huge kind of like rocky structure that runs through it from the time of the Ice Age, which is quite fun to climb and things like that. And there was like pentagrams painted on it, but they were probably teenagers messing about, that kind of thing. Very interesting part of New York, actually, that whole area there. So then a few years later, when I was a bit older, settled down, there was a guy called Maury Terry wrote a book about the Son of Sam killing, and this is really what the mythologizing came from. And he brought the whole Process Church thing in and linked and created this kind of enormous modern mythology around it. At the time I read the book, I thought it was interesting. I wasn't fully convinced. And I thought Maury Terry's writings, the book was sensational, it was a huge hit, was very corny at times. Like he would describe a girl being shot by Berkowitz, and he would write things like, she fell to the ground like petals from a flower on an autumn day. You know, that kind of corny writing. And I remember like reading it on the subway and laughing, but there was a lot of information in there regarding the processed church. And Maury Terry is probably the one person who's demonized the modern processed church. I couldn't really find anything negative outside what he wrote about them, and then people who followed him about the processed church. Another reason I was interested in the processed church is they were heavily rumored to be connected to the band the Blue Oyster Cult from Long Island, who I was and still am an enormous fan of. And so about a few years ago, a friend of the Beyond Room 313 channel, a guy called Manny Grossman, has a YouTube channel. He lives in New York. He lives in the North Bronx, Yonkers area. And he had read Maury Terry's book and started making his own very, very good and very intensive investigation. He's just a regular guy. He's a gardener. He lives up in the North Bronx, Yonkers area. And going around where all the Son of Sam murders happened and following leads and rumors and things within the Maury Terry book, which is expanded into certain wealthy families in upstate New York, in the Yonkers, who were connected to it, and this kind of thing. It's been expanded into Terry's book. Maury Terry's book was very truther-like, in that it sort of like it over-connected dots. But you're still interested. You want to know if this stuff is true, you know? And so Manny Grossman went around very good videos traveling around Brooklyn, Queens, New York, Manhattan, following the Berkowitz story. And I did an interview. I had him on the Beyond Room 313 symposium, and his channel is very good. It doesn't only do that. He's also big into the American megalith stuff up in upstate New York, and he's made some great videos on that stuff. So you should check out his channel. He's a very interesting man. And I got a message from him a few months ago, and he said, "I've disowned all my work into Maury Terry. He was an alcoholic fantasist who lied about everything." So that kind of, it not only showed that Manny Grossman was a proper researcher, but it also showed that, demonstrated why I was never convinced by his book when it came out. So Berkowitz seems to have taken this mythology that Maury Terry had written about him, and is now using it in court to try and get himself out. And it's really the processed church has been demonized unfairly, I think, over that stuff. So I think Berkowitz, he's just an ordinary schlub, but he's definitely using. He's sneaky too, and he's using the mythology, the fake mythology that Maury Terry created to try and get himself out on early parole, the Christian thing. So he was just he was just a weirdo who was going around killing people. I don't believe there was any proof. I agree with Manny Grossman. There was other people, there may have been, but I don't think there's any proof. Certainly Maury Terry didn't bring it forward. It was just him shooting at young couples for a laugh, for guilt. Now, I have another connection to Berkowitz and Son of Sam, is that I used to live in Bayside in Queens, and literally across the street on Northern Boulevard was a Wendy's fast food restaurant that used to be a nightclub, where Berkowitz had shot dead a guy, and I think a girl died and a guy survived, a couple that were, young lovers that were making out in a car. So there was a sexual element of jealousy and that kind of thing probably to it as well that went with that. So I was like literally across the street from where I lived. Berkowitz had killed two people, or killed one person and injured another. And so, we have to be very careful, because the Berkowitz story really is just a loser killing people that has been mythologized into something it's not, until more evidence comes out. What you were saying about Savile and Sutcliffe, that's also a mythology that came out, and I personally played a large role in this, but I've been very careful to cover my tracks. I haven't expanded it into, like, if you were to take my work in the Savile and Sutcliffe and do it Maury Terry style, it would have been he was taking orders directly from Prince Charles to go out and kill these people, that kind of thing. And Margaret Thatcher every Christmas was giving him his orders on which women to kill and that kind. That's how he took. I was very careful to keep it just between Savile and Sutcliffe and not expand it out. Now, yeah, I think basically there's a lot of truth to what you were saying, Dan, about I think sexual dementia and sexual frustration does play a role in these kind of killings, certainly Berkowitz and certainly Sutcliffe. And we always remember whenever he was asked, Jimmy Savile was asked, how come Jimmy had never got married and settled down with the right woman? He used to reply, women are brain damage. Now, that's interesting because that's how Sutcliffe used to kill his female victims. He would come up behind them and smash their brains in using a welder's hammer, a ball peen hammer. And they would die of a crushed skull, their brains and everything coming out. And then he would often savage or molest or bite them. And that's how the thing of the two teeth marks on Irene Richards's body in Soldiers Field and Leeds came about. The other teeth marks were absolutely Savile. Now, so what I think happened in that case was Sutcliffe was killing, and Savile took a fascination with him because he'd already been connected to Moira Hindley. Remember, he said, I am the Moira Hindley story. And he said that on the BBC. And we all know he modeled his image in that photograph on that Moira Hindley mugshot. Well, I mean, I was the one who came up with that, but I think it stands up. And as you write about in our upcoming book, there's a huge connection between certain nightclubs where you live that Hindley and Brady went to, where Savile was the DJ. So it's impossible that he would not have known them, because those two practically lived in nightclubs where Savile worked. So it's impossible he didn't know them and they didn't know him. So that's going to be a big story I think we can explore in years to come. Now, the Savile thing and Sutcliffe thing, he didn't have the royal blessing or anything like this. I think he was very well connected. And he told Margaret Thatcher or somebody, the police are harassing me over nothing. And she just made a phone call and told them to stop, that kind of thing. I don't think it was any kind of great. He wasn't murdering on behalf of the Illuminati or anything like that with Sutcliffe. That's why the two of them. Now, in the recent film, TV series about Savile, with what's his name, that English actor in it, they quote a line where Savile was being dressed down by someone, and he said, a writer, and he says, you said when you were in Broadmoor that these people are not responsible for what they do, it's something inside them. Well, there you go. Whatever was inside Savile wanted to communicate what was ever inside Sutcliffe. And that comment you made at the beginning, as that someone had said, the detective, about we should give them life in prison rather than the electric chair because the entity jumps one to the other. I totally believe that. I've spoken to police detectives who've interviewed serial killers and child killers, and they said all kinds of weird things happen. Like the room becomes very cold when they come in, tape recorders don't work, batteries are drained down, strange voices are on the tape along with his voice. And so I agree. That's a lot like that film Fallen with Denzel Washington, a fantastic film, where the entity jumps from human to human or even animal to animal, in the film. And yeah, there's a lot of truth to that. In terms of serial killers and the occult, there's loads of it. There's tons of it. There's even stuff, I think, about Ted Bundy that has yet to come out. Remember, serial killers like Ted Bundy, in terms of how he set about what he did, was almost like a religious thing to him. There was rituals involved. There was a specific thing. And he would often go back to the site where he'd murdered somebody because he could feel the life energy and finger the soil where it happened, as he could feel the life energy where it drained out of that woman that he was killing at that point. And he could relive the rush of it all over again. Now, Bundy was absolutely possessed. He there's one famous court case where he was real smug and doing great in court and wising them all up. There's one particular part of his trial where he was all smug and was actually playing the lawyer part in court. And what happened was his last dice had rolled out, and he kind of like had an impromptu press conference. You saw the real Ted Bundy there, the smiling, glib, sort of like Jack the Lad had vanished, and a brutal monster had suddenly emerged in front of the world. And it's really what set him down, because he made the mistake of going on camera and doing that. So Bundy, I still think there's a lot of that story yet to be told.
So yeah, absolutely. I believe that most, I'm not saying all, but most serial killers have got something in them, and you can definitely see it in the face. And I've seen those Bundy clips that you're talking about, where he comes across as a cheeky chappy trying to make the courtroom laugh and be the joker, and then it changes, and then it kind of like switches, and the real persona comes through, and it's very, very different to what was clowning around in the courtroom when he first came in to the courtroom. And a lot of people get a little bit arsy when you say it could be possibly demon possession, because they say that you're making up excuses for what they've done, but you're not making up excuses, because they've still done it. They've still done it.
I think people are afraid, though, that they won't get prison sentences because of it. No, they still should get prison sentences, because the important thing is to keep that entity inside them rather than getting out.
Yeah.
This is the same reason I'm also against exorcism by the Catholic Church or any church, because when they release the entity from the person, all they're doing is sending it somewhere else.
Exactly. It's going to go somewhere else. Yeah.
They're not. It's not a banishment ritual like magicians and people in magical orders do, where they send it back to the abyss. They literally just expel it from the victim.
And I think most of them have got something in them, and I don't know if it's to do with the damaged childhood, and it's the psychic firewalls that are down and it can get in. I don't know if the damaged childhoods bring on these extreme ideologies that they have about control and power over other humans, because they've got this warped sense of women or whatever, and it gets in that way. Or whether they've been dabbling in something, they've been messing with something, or they're just unfortunate people who have got holes in the aura and things can attach to them and easily manipulate them. Weak-minded people. And I think you find that weak-minded people are the ones who are more obsessed with controlling others.
I'll give you a story. There was a serial killer in the 1960s called John List. He was a kind of a clerical middle management accountant type who lived in suburban New Jersey with a wife and two kids. I think it was 3 kids, 2 or 3 kids, a couple of kids, and a suburban house, the respectable family, pillar of the community guy. And something had happened, and he used to commute every day to Manhattan to his job. Well, something happened when he was fired from his job. But because of the pressures of maintaining the American dream, he pretended to go to work every day in Manhattan and come home in the evening on his regular commute. He'd spend all day in places like Central Park or wandering around Manhattan, and he couldn't find a way to get a new job. So what he must have done was probably pretty weird. And also, it was a time in New York, in America, where society was breaking down. New York was starting to implode. The Vietnam War was having terrible social effects, as well as the civil rights thing on American society. So it wasn't a good time to be out of a job and try to play the American dream and that kind of thing. One day he decided, this could have been an entity that entered him, we don't know, that he was going to solve the problem by killing his family and disappear into the woods. So he literally did that. He set a trap for his family, and he killed. There was a horrific killing of his 2 kids, 2 sons, and his wife. He put the bodies in I think it was a girl as well, I can't remember. Put the bodies in the basement and turned the air conditioning on so the bodies wouldn't decompose to full. This gave him enough time to scarper. He disappeared into America and was never heard of ever again. He was able to disappear into America because, again, America was going through a time of great change. There was people moving all across the country back and forth. The society was in a bit of a bad state because of the Vietnam War and all that stuff. And America was rebuilding itself from the ruins of a kind of a social catastrophe. So it was easy to hide. It was easy to disappear and start again. And in the 1980s, a TV show called America's Most Wanted was on. And one of the things they used to do was they used to get skulls. They used to get photographs of people on the run and create how they would look now using plastic models. So an artist would see the picture of them when they were last seen and then age them by 25, 30 years into the 1980s. And a woman was watching America's Most Wanted, and the artist got the guy's face perfectly. John List was living next door with a new name and a new identity, a model citizen. His wife that he was with now and his family, we had no idea who he really was, and they caught him. And so that's a strange one. It was kind of like the loss of social status made him do a disgusting thing, kill his kids and his wife, and vanish. But he got away with it, which shows you that lots of them do get away with it. But in that case, you think, was it a moment of madness, or was it with the repression seems to play a big part in this? Have you noticed this? Was it repression of the imminent catastrophe of his life that made him do that out of desperation? Or what did an entity get in there? You do have to wonder, but there seems to be repression seems to be a common thing, as well as broken childhoods. Both Hindley Maura Hindley came from a terrible family, awful alcoholism, and all kinds of horrible things were the norm. Brady's childhood is a mystery. He grew up in a poor family in the Gorbals, but there's people who said that there was something strangely aristocratic about him, that he may have been the bastard son of some kind of a high up person.
Serial killers seem to have two different kind of looks. I put them into two camps. Some of them just look emotionless and empty, like devoid of any empathy, any feeling. They just do what they do, just like a shark does what it does.
Ramirez.
And then others, they all seem to have a similar look. They have that evil. There's evil behind the eyes. It's not empty. It's not just a shark doing what a shark does. There is an evil behind the face. And very often, like when you mentioned with Ted Bundy, they try to mask that by putting on some kind of persona, like he tried to be the charmer. He tried to charm.
Yeah, he did have $1 million smile.
Yes, he did.
He used that.
And that's what made him very scary, because he was a very attractive man. And that just brings it home that evil wears a smile very often. Because that's what chilled me to the bone most about watching the documentaries about Bundy. When you saw him, and I don't know about any other women out there, but when you saw him, you think, Jesus Christ, if I was single and somebody like that come up to me in a bar and offered me a drink, I'd probably say yes.
Yeah, he would do the white knight thing, though. He would often look for girls that had limps or had broken legs or broken arms. And he would help them get out of a car or lift them shopping in, and they were struggling because the arm or leg might have been in a cast from an accident. And he would suddenly jump over there and said, "Oh God, let me help you with groceries." And he would crack jokes. That was how he'd normally get these girls, that he would play the white knight.
See, that to me, that's not emotionless. That is an evil. That is something behind the facade.
He has tactics and plans. Yeah.
And even Ramirez, you said that he had like a face with no emotion. But have you seen those pictures of him with the teeth that are rotting? His teeth are literally pointed because his teeth were rotting because he didn't look after them. But I don't just think it was bad teeth. I actually think that Ramirez was rotting from the inside.
Yeah.
And whenever I look at pictures of Ramirez, I get the smell of rotting cabbage. That's all I can think about when I look at him. He's rotting cabbage, like he's rotting from the inside.
Another thing about serial killers is it's a very interesting phenomenon. I don't think Ireland had its first serial killer until the 1990s. and there was no record of one before that. And years ago, I had a friend in New Orleans. Oh, he lived in New York when I knew him, and he was one of the editors of Fangoria magazine. He's very interested in serial killers like me, and he told me that there's a certain element to it. It has to be an industrialized nation, and it has to have a standard of living up, higher than the world global standard of living, higher than average. So like a wealthy country. And that's exactly how it happened in Ireland. Just as Ireland got rich, we had a first serial killer. So, you don't get serial killers generally in poor countries. It's very interesting. It's like they're drawn to places that there's money and there's power and there's people are driven by more materialistic lifestyles than, say, in an agrarian society.
Well, look at Harold Shipman. He was very affluent, and
Yeah.
I don't believe he was possessed. I believe that he was on a quest for power. I think he had some godlike complex going on there, and he liked to play God, which is another another facade of many of the serial killers. But he liked to have the power over the old ladies and decide whether they were going to live or die. And he was so devious that he would just happen to be passing the street and the door of an old lady, and he'd knock on and say, "Oh, I was just in the neighbourhood and I thought I'd just knock on and see how you are. It's all part of the service. Oh, and while I'm here, I've got a shot of B12 in the bag. I might as well give it you now."
Yeah, they also get power trips. Like you look at Berkowitz, a pathetic nebbish loser, right? A schlub. But he brought New York City to its knees. At one point during the Son of Sam hysteria, hairdressers in New York were making a fortune from women getting their hair cut short because the whole thing was that he attacked women and it didn't attack men. So a lot of women were wearing their hair up inside hats, and there was even a fashion that took off in the late 70s of girls. You see in a lot of late 70s, early 80s films, girls wearing caps, like the caps that the old Irish farmers and fishermen wear, that kind of cap.
Like a baker boy cap.
Yeah, like in England, you see the old miners wear them.
Yeah.
Well, they became a rage with girls in America in the 70s and 80s. That came from girls putting their hair up and wearing them in New York from Son of Sam. So could you imagine? Here's Berkowitz, a schlub and a nobody, who's brought the greatest city in the world to its knees in terror of him. So the element of power they get from this is staggering, Just
Yeah.
like Jack the Ripper did in the East End of London. He brought this, just like, lots of things. Yeah, lots of them.
And it's all done anonymously, isn't it? Like a keyboard warrior.
Look at Sutcliffe and the whole north of England, and how they used to have they used to have that when the Wearside Pete tape came out, purporting to be the voice of the Ripper, and I'm convinced it's Savile putting on a Wearside accent. They used to pubs, clubs, workmen's clubs, nightclubs, everything, even factories in the afternoon, department stores would stop for 3 minutes and a voice would say, "Do you recognize the voice of this that you hear on the tape?" And they would play the Wearside Pete's tape to everybody. It was just incredible. It was almost like the police, and maybe they were in that case because of Savile, were engineering wild hysteria and terror in the population. They were like almost part of the horror as well.
And not only that, but there was a lot of domestic problems caused by that, because a lot of women were looking at the husbands thinking, "Is it you? Is it you?" And a lot of women, and a friend of mine, her husband got hauled in for questioning just because he had dark hair and a mustache.
Well, they're the kind of women who think like, I'll tell you what kind of women would they were. There's a certain kind of woman out there that if a husband or boyfriend even says hello to a woman, or a woman, if he bumps into a woman into a supermarket and he says, "Oh, sorry, I'm sorry," and she says, "That's okay, forgive me," she'll start saying you're having an affair with her. That kind of woman were the ones who were calling up the police. The ones who would like these kind of insecure women that think that every woman he looks at or knows he's having an affair with. They were the women who were calling up the police and saying, "I think my husband's the Ripper," because the same personality types.
Do you think because I was only 8, 9 or 10, I forget, and at the time, but I do remember the Crime Watch program. I don't know if you had the Crime Watch UK program where you were, but we
I
had
was also very young. I wouldn't have watched. I was probably 12 or something. I wouldn't have watched that kind of stuff then.
it was on, and I just remember my parents discussing it, and I do remember that they would ask you to look around the community, look around your workplace, and if you see anything suspicious or anybody suspicious. And I'm wondering if they whipped up that frenzy, knowing that people would try and police it themselves, and it would cause all this distraction and all this chaos among working class people. And then in the meantime, the real perpetrator, one half of which we know was Savile, getting away with it scot free.
Another weird part of that is Thatcher got sick of hearing about it and went up and spoke to both the South and West Yorkshire police and told them to do something about these wretched women. Exact quote. Not catch the killer, but do something about these wretched women. Now, I know, okay, you could say there's all kinds of conspiracy theories there and this, that, and the other. I think it's more of a case of her respectable Middle England stuff, seeing any working class woman or even a prostitute as sort of like, well, they're loose. What do you expect? That kind of thing.
Yeah, it was a dark time.
See, he started killing prostitutes and then he moved on to regular girls. You know, he started with the prostitutes in Deliverance from Evil by
Yeah,
David Yalom. At the very end of the book, he lists a series of killings that he believes that Sutcliffe might have done. Not and two of them were in Sweden because he was driving a truck route between and two prostitutes between England and Sweden during this period, and two prostitutes had been murdered in Sweden but being hit in the back of the head with a ball peen hammer. So that's interesting. He may have murdered in Sweden, not only in England but in Sweden too.
the reason I put him on the list, as in serial killers under the occult, was based on your video about the 666 murders, upon the motorway, which I thought that was very, very interesting and insightful, about up and down the motorway on the M62 and the was it the M56? There was
Well,
three of them.
yeah. Well, the roads all have the number 6 in them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they went right past Savile's house. And Savile lived in the middle of the whole region, between sort of like, Scarborough and Preston.
Mm.
You could draw an arc right between that. That was where all the murders took place, and that was also Savile's highway. Another thing about the supernaturalism of the Yorkshire Ripper case, was that one of the first things I read as a kid that got me interested in that stuff was that he claimed that he was a grave digger at one point, working in an old cemetery, and he said the statues of the figurines on the graves of angels and the Virgin Mary and everything used to talk to him and tell him that prostitutes were the cause of all the problems in the world.
And it makes you wonder if that comes from his father, because his father was obsessed with the mother being adulterous.
And of course, he had underlying schizophrenia or something like that, or else he was possessed. But there was also the thing that when Savile was asked by Edwina Curry, after he'd successfully sorted out Stoke Mandeville Spinal Clinic, to go and sort out Broadmoor psychiatric hospital / prison, he used to go into Sutcliffe's. Well, they're not cells; they're more like rooms. They're like dorms. Close the door, and staff would hear that said they heard him screaming for hours, laughing, like the two of them were having a great banter, like old pals. And that was one of the things that set me off. Was like Savile was very happy in Broadmoor because he was with one of his heroes.
Yes, it does make you wonder what type of person befriends not one but two sets of.
Well, it's the famous photo of Frank Bruno, the boxer, shaking Sutcliffe's hand, and Savile there. Frank Bruno, and I've heard a lot of truthers going on about Frank Bruno was involved. Now, Frank Bruno was just there visiting, doing charity work or whatever, because he was a big star at the time as a boxer. And he's a very likable guy as well. And he just probably introduced him to Sutcliffe, and And Bruno said he didn't know who he was when the photograph was taken. He had a picture of him shaking hands with lots of patients, but that was the only one that got out to the media. And it makes you wonder who snuck it out to the media.
Yeah, if that was a setup or not, shake this person's hand.
Yes, Savile had done that because the nurses all took pictures for the hospital's records, for the staff and stuff. So that was the only one that got out, and that was Savile who probably leaked it.
Was very suspicious his involvement with Broadmoor, because I think even the one of the managers at Broadmoor said, "I don't understand why you're here."
Well, I don't understand what he was there because he had raised £10 million, which was a huge amount of money in the 70s, colossal in 2 years for Stoke Mandeville, which was falling to bits. And so he was seen as Jim will fix it, someone who get things sorted. He was volunteering as a porter at the Royal Hospital, the Royal Infirmary in Leeds. And we all know now why he was doing that he had access to dead bodies and that kind of thing. Now, that documentary portrayed one of the porters as being kind of calling him out, but actually the investigation showed that him and the porters used to raise cadavers in wheelchairs up and down the corridors for a laugh. So, and he used to pull the glass eyeballs out of dead bodies, and he had rings made of them, and would go on top of the pops that night with the rings with glass eyeballs on them that were made out of dead bodies he was having sex with. I mean, it's as dark as it gets. It's as gruesome and dark as it gets. And we've only just those glass eyeball rings used to wear. They were pulled out of dead bodies in Leeds Infirmary, and so he was seen as Edwina Curry, who was a weirdo anyway. She's a very odd person. Last time I saw her was she was telling people to get the needle craft or they could die. She didn't care. It's really nasty. Now she's a strange one anyway, and so she probably thought everybody knew that Savile had fixed up a hospital that was in ruins, and he also was a volunteer porter at Leeds Infirmary. So she probably thought, I'm just giving the good side of it. We don't know, there could be an ulterior motive, that this is a guy who can get things done in the health service, that he can find money and sort things out. So he got a managerial job, but they gave him the keys to the place and his own live-in apartment. So, and at one time he was living more in Broadmoor than he was living in his own apartment in Leeds or in Scarborough.
Yeah, it's all very, very, very odd. And the eyeballs on the rings and wearing them on the TV, there's got to be some ritualistic aspect behind that. He's got to have some, I don't like to use the word magical, where he's
it was burlesquing, energy harvesting.
Yeah.
He was, he knew that he probably knew that someone at Leeds Infirmary noticed that eyeballs had been taken from a cadaver, and he was working there as a porter, a volunteer porter. So he goes on TV as if to say, "Screw you! Look what I can do! I'm untouchable." And it is a cult in the true sense. Because what word cult mean? It means hidden. It means clandestine. That's why the occult and spying and espionage, we should do a future show on that, are so intrinsically linked. But absolutely, definitely 100% that was, I've seen no proof anywhere that Savile was involved in the occult. None. Involved in an occultic group, had any kind of occultic training, but I believe he had the natural ability.
He was a solo practitioner.
And he developed it himself. He just realized early on that he could do things and certain things. Like you look at Jim will fix it. He had a magic box of tricks in that chair. Remember the chair used to have all slots and things, and he had the cigar. And it was one stupid film on YouTube about called The Magician, Jimmy Savile or something. It was rubbish, but they were basically claiming that paganism is the usual devils and all that. But then he was a pagan devil. But there was one thing that they did pick up on that I thought was actually valid, was that he used a cigar as a magic wand, and almost like in a kind of a bedazzling way on television.
I'm also convinced that his image, aside from it looking like Hindley, I think his image was his way of making his own sigil to burn his image into your eyeballs, so that whenever his name was mentioned, his image just automatically, that image comes up in
And
your
to add
mind.
and to add one more string to the possession bowl, he had a terrible. He drank like a fish towards the end, but before he drank, he was a heavy chain smoker of very strong Cuban cigars, and he lived on junk food.
Mm.
Now, in people will tell you in religions like Santeria, and I've seen it myself, where they invoke the entity inside them. The entity wants cigars, junk food, and whiskey.
Right.
So there you go. They said he lived on junk food, cigars, and towards the end of his life, like endless bottles of brandy.
And he always had a monstrous look about him to me. He always looked otherworldly, and not in a nice way. But when he got older, he looked monstrous to me.
Only when he got away. He actually, remember when he first cropped his hair short and had a nice normal haircut.
Was that around the
The
late
early
60s?
early 80s, mid 80s. I think
Yes.
I was wondering if he was. This was around the time of, like, it was early 80s. I know it was because Princess Diana was at Stoke Mandeville, and he has a very similar haircut to her, which I found very interesting. And then he's fraternizing constantly around Prince Charles, which I find very interesting.
When he
And
got his knighthood, he had the short hair and she stood next to him.
and I'll add one more thing to that. Prince Charles' mentor was Lord Louis Mountbatten, who was blown up in 1980 or 79 by the IRA, just up the road here, right? I often wondered if Savile's constant hanging around Prince Charles, was he trying to make himself a surrogate uncle for Mountbatten? Because that's how they think. That's how they think, that would be his door into the royal family. Obviously, not as a member, but there is a lot of proof, not a lot of proof, there is substantial evidence that the Duchess may well have been a Duchess, and he may have been the spawn of royalty through her. We don't know. But that his relationship with, there's more photographs of Prince Charles with Savile than there is with him and Diana at one point in their marriage.
Mm. And she didn't like him.
Yeah, Savile was picking up on the marriage deteriorating. He knew that he needed an uncle. He wasn't close to his own father, so he was trying to nudge his way in there as Prince Charles, sort of like surrogate uncle daddy. And then he gets himself the Princess Di haircut at the same time. It's all very creepy and spooky and weird.
It is. It is.
Yeah, because that when Stoke Mandeville was open, with the renovation was fixed, and Prince Charles and Diana were there cutting the ribbon. That's the earliest video I can find of Savile with the short haircut, the Diana type haircut.
Right. I'll just throw something in to the mix there before we finish. Where I live, we had Hindley and Brady here. It's been rumoured that Savile's been here to visit them. And we've also had Prince Charles here in the 90s, opening up a block of flats. So we've had them all here. And, it's a deep town.
Yeah.
And they've all been here for one reason or another, and they're all connected.
And paedophilia is a big part of it. Like Mountbatten was living in Classy Bond, the Gothic castle up the road here, and they were trafficking during the Troubles. They were trafficking young boys from Kincora's home in Belfast through networks of Freemasons and the RUC, and then right across the border into the Republic in Sligo, there was a network of paedophile trafficking young boys to Mountbatten's, his Gothic, his tuna fishing lodge is that's where he went there for tuna fishing. And it's a Gothic castle, and it's still a spooky place. And if you show up at the front door, you get people chasing you away and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And that's where Mountbatten lived. And so, noncery seems to be a big part of it as well.
So that is the end of tonight's first topic, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Have we not mentioned someone that you think we should have? What are your thoughts on serial killers and the occult? And why do so many seem to find themselves caught up in the dark side of its philosophy and in some cases its rituals? We'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on the subject, so please do keep the conversation going in the comments.
And a future program, I haven't spoken to Sarah about this yet, but it's been on my head for a while, is serial killers in the non-English-speaking world. Serial killers in Germany, and there are some cases I have in France and so on. So that we don't know about. So that will be one for a future show. Serial killers and the occult in non-English speaking lands. So if you know any, if you live in Germany or anywhere in Europe, let us know about that.
For this week's folk horror, we're reviewing the 1973 sci-fi dystopian movie Soylent Green, directed by Richard Fletcher. I hope I pronounced that right. Anyway, it's a nightmarish, futuristic film about the controlling power of big corporations and an innocent cop who stumbles on the truth. And it's set in 2022, where overpopulation and dwindling resources have pushed humanity to the brink of extinction, or at least that's what they've been led to believe. And the story is about Detective Robert Thorne, played by Charlton Heston, and he's investigating the murder of a wealthy member of the Soylent Board, and he eventually uncovers a disturbing secret about the Soylent Green food, which is a highly processed staple food for the masses. And Soylent Green is a multi-million-dollar corporation that controls and produces most of the world's food supply. They produce this type of cracker, and the new Soylent Green cracker is supposed to be more nutritious than the other Soylent products, which are Soylent Red and Soylent Yellow. And the Soylent Corporation is a shady and secretive entity, with its name coming from the words soy and lentil. And in the days leading up to Simonson's murder, he became distant and worried because he's discovered the truth about the corporation that he's a part of, and they've arranged to have him murdered so he can't disclose the secret. And Detective Thorne goes to Simonson's fancy apartment and he meets his bodyguard and the furniture, which is, well, the furniture is the women that can be rented together with these fancy apartments for the rich. And the Governor Santini and other powerful men want to disrupt and end Thorne's investigation of Simonson's murder because they know the secret of Soylent too. But Thorne continues, and he eventually discovers the secret of the ingredient used to manufacture the Soylent products and how it's supplied. Detective Thorne has a good friend called Sol Roth, played by Edward G. Robinson. And Sol is also known as the Book. And Sol's part of a group of another group of intellectual people who are also known as Books. And these are the independent researchers and free thinkers of the time. And in researching the case for Thorne, Roth brings 2 volumes of the Soylent Green Oceanographic Survey Report 2015 to 2019 to the team of the other bookworms. And the people conclude from these reports that the oceans are actually dying and can no longer produce the plankton from which Soylent Green is made. And that confirms to Sol Roth that Simonson's murder was ordered by his fellow Soylent Corporation board members who knew that Simonson was becoming increasingly more troubled by the truth, and they feared he might disclose it to the public. Now, I can remember my parents or grandparents watching this film on TV back in the 70s, and I was just a kid then, and I was darting in and out of the living room, preoccupied with my own toys and games. But there's this one scene from the film that stayed with me all these years. And it's the scene when Sol Roth decides that he's had enough and he checks himself into a government clinic for euthanasia. And I can remember these images of an elderly man on a bed, attended by two individuals wearing robes, and the room's walls transformed into a huge cinema screen. And it started showing this amazing imagery of a beautiful world while playing this classical music. And I can remember every detail of that, even down to what the classical music was. And watching it again now, I was genuinely moved watching that scene with Charlton Heston when he was peering through the window at those images of a bygone world. And he finally understood the beauty of what he'd only heard about, because when Sol would reminisce about that world, Thorne would just dismiss it as mere nostalgia because it was something he'd never witnessed. But when the beauty of the old world was there on the screen, and he turned to Sol and admitted, "You were right, I see it now." And watching that part really got me in the feels, and it reminded me of all the yearning that we all talk about sometimes, how we feel a sense of nostalgia and we long for something, but we can't quite put it into words. And it's not just about specific memories, but more of a yearning for the world that we once knew. And when I watch dystopian films, I've constantly observed this distinct shade of green that effectively amplifies the desolation and this hopelessness of the setting of the film. And I always call this particular shade of green dystopian green. Don't know if it's an actual thing, but it's just what I call it. And it's a really fitting colour that adds to the dystopian world on the screen. And in this film, it's there again, but it's never overused. And it just sets the mood of the scenes when it's used. And I found myself noticing it at the moments of foreboding. And I just really liked the film. It was a typical 1970s movie, plenty of action, plenty of gunfights and gun shooting. And it showed the lifestyles of the rich being uninterrupted while the working class people were the ones that had to sacrifice everything. And when these riot scoopers would turn up to scoop up the people at the food markets, because there was often riots there due to hunger, it just showed you that the society was seen as nothing more than cattle. Oh, and I wasn't sure actually if the police were in on the silent secret too, because when Detective Thorne screams out the truth at the end, you're not sure, or at least I wasn't sure, if his boss is shocked by the revelation or whether he's pissed off by it, because now there's another mouth that needs to be silenced. So I wasn't quite sure at the end if the police were involved as well. But I really enjoyed it. It's very telling, and it makes you think about synthetic food and what's behind it, as well as all the consequences of unchecked corporate power and the importance of transparency and accountability. And I think now is the perfect time to watch this movie. And I thought it was brilliant.
It's from that golden period where Charlton Heston was the Hollywood's king of dystopian sci-fi. He made Soylent Green, The Omega Man, and the two Planet of the Apes films that he was in. They're all fantastic masterpieces. He was a magnificent actor. He'd reinvented himself from a Hollywood star leading man into an action sci-fi kind of guy by the time he was in his 40s. And he was perfect for Soylent Green. He just played the part of Thorne so well. By the way, one of the reasons you might have been emotional during that scene is that in real life, Charlton Heston and Eric Borgnine were best friends, drinking buddies. And Borgnine was dying of cancer. And Charlton Heston's tears in that scene are genuine, because he was saying goodbye to his real life friend. Borgnine died soon, not long after, of cancer, but Charlton Heston knew this, knew it would be the last time they'd work together. And so there were genuine tears that you saw in that film. So when they were playing Mozart's, I think it was the Pastoral Symphony or Beethoven, it was just beautiful. Now, they said the population of New York was 100 million. And this is a 15-minute city thing, because what they'd done was they had pushed everyone into the cities so the elites could enjoy the perfect countryside. And they told that the world was overpopulated. It wasn't. They had moved everyone into the cities. So it was like the WEF, the thing. And so it's very prophetic, that film, in many ways. And even the whole thing of soy. Remember, that film was made decades before soy was even a proper food. Well, it's not food, but marketed as a proper food product and everything like it is now. And they had the bodies were being turned into the biscuits or the crackers or whatever. Well, they now have these liquefaction cremations that turn people into liquid. So they're only one step away from that, from liquefying bodies and turning them into food, recycling them. So the film is as dark as it is. You're not depressed by it because it's a really good action film too. There's great chase scenes in it, beautiful girls. It has a lot of that kind of thing in it, and it looks classy. There's lots of cool scenes, like where he steals the meat and vegetables and the whiskey from the guy's house and Simonson's apartment, and him and Ergus Borgnine have an old-fashioned dinner together. And that's when Borgnine decides he really doesn't want to live anymore, because he's kind of goes to see his friends, who are kind of like the old fogies who keep the old world alive in their thoughts. And he seems to discover something that they don't really mention in the film, but it was probably the truth, that the real old beautiful world did exist, but they weren't allowing the peasants to get near it. And they were locking them in super 15-minute cities. Like, that's why Manhattan had 100 million people living in it. But there was some classic kind of 70s action dark scenes, like where the guy shoots the priest while taking his confession. That came out of nowhere, and that was quite good. And the way they used the church as well as a kind of a sanctuary, and the priest having a constant state of nervous breakdown trying to help people. Even God had left them, that kind of thing, and the priest had figured that one out. Yeah, Silent Green is a masterpiece. It's hard to believe. It's from the golden age of Hollywood, the 1970s. It's the period where Hollywood wasn't afraid to tackle difficult subjects, challenging stories. And it was around the years of the Arab oil crisis. There was genuine fears of population explosion again, the post-Vietnam or the Vietnam era. A lot of that kind of, like, what is an American? What does it mean to be an American? Why are we killing these people in Southeast Asia and putting men on the moon at the same time? All that stuff going on. So Charlton Heston kind of in real life spanned those two worlds. He wasn't John Wayne, he wasn't Al Pacino, but he was kind of like the one in between the two. Hollywood John Wayne, Hollywood Al Pacino, and there was Charlton Heston in the middle as a kind of like to move you over. But yeah, a big fan of the film. I tell you, I don't want to see it again for a long time. I tell you, not because it's bleak or it's boring or I don't like it. It's like one of those films, like, that was great, I watched it, that's enough. I need a decade's break before I see it again. That's the kind of film that it is for me. I wouldn't go back to it like I would with his other films. Like, I have the Planet of the Apes original box set. I got it for €1, 7 movies with all the extras in the charity shop. And that'll always refer back to, because those films are fantastic. And yeah, 9 out of 10, I'd give it.
I don't think you need to go back and watch it again, because when you think about it, we're bloody living it. Or we will be if things carry on the way they're going. So you don't need to watch it.
Yeah, it's funny how those films go like that. That are like, you watch them, that's great, I really enjoyed it, but I don't care if I see them ever again. Not because it's bad, it's done the job.
Yes.
It's done. Like American Werewolf in London was like that for me. The great film, the job is done. Where something like Alien, I want to see it over and over again, because there's things in the background you miss and you need to check that out.
It's more layered.
Yeah, and it's a bit more occultic in its own kind of cinematic way.
I think in this film, they pretty much got it all down to a T of what's going on now. The only thing they didn't pick up on in the film, and who would, because you'd have to be completely insane, is the wokeness. They didn't get that in there, did they? Women were women and the men were men.
Yeah.
There was none of that nonsense, even though it was just mirroring what it's like today. They didn't have any of the woke nonsense, but who could predict that? I mean, even nobody could see that coming back then.
I can't even think of a film from the past that predicted wokeness. There's only one that kind of showed that was Quatermass 4, where the Professor Quatermass goes on a TV show called Tittity Bumpity, and it's basically this camp producer going, "It's the biggest show on TV," and all this kind of thing, and it's just mentally stupid, brain melting garbage. So that was kind of the only one from the past that would kind of showed you what was coming. it was a mixture of like, stupid television and gender bending kind of thing. But that was it. That was it. I'm sure there's films out there that have it, but that'd be an interesting thing. Films that portray old films that portrayed woke before woke.
Yeah.
Even films like Network didn't have it. You
No.
know,
That's
I
a
can't.
good film.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. So that's something we look at, the woke before woke. Yeah, they're all sexy like Bond girls.
And it just literally went straight into the heart of the WEF, if you ask me.
Yeah.
Inadvertently, maybe, but it's still.
Well, I found it interesting that Simonson had a conscience. He didn't want to live anymore after what he's seen, that what government and corporations have done to the people.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because the film portrayed that it was overpopulated, but you knew it wasn't. You knew they were all just shunted into these cattle pens, if you like.
Smart. Well, that's what the smart city will descend into. You see people showing dystopian Chinese cities. Well, that's the future if we don't stop these assholes, and we will. That's the future that they will, because they'll probably genuinely believe that these cities will be utopians. But you and I grew up in planned council estates that were built in the 60s, and they were supposed to be utopians, new towns or new states for the people. And they were built like the politicians and they were on the surface vast improvements on what previous communities like our parents came from, but they were left to ruin and fall into rot in no time. That they were slums with the early 70s. Well, the same thing will happen with these like 15-minute smart cities, that they want to herd people into. And they'll all be flash in the pan and great with all kinds of advantages for maybe 4 or 5 years, and then the admin falls apart, the corruption moves in, the bad management, and they'll be hells on earth, just like the city, just like New York was portrayed in Soylent Green.
Soylent Green, yeah. So it's very telling movie.
Yeah, and then it will end up like New York in Escape from New York. They'll just abandon the city because it'll be unmanageable. And now we look at ancient cities, and you look at these ancient cities, these colossal cities all over North Africa that were huge, populated, busy commercial centers in Roman times, or places like Petra, and all over the place. These big cities that are now empty now. There's a few in Italy. Well, that's what happened. That's what happened. The city just destroyed. It just fell apart from bad management.
It's definitely a film to watch, and I think watching it in 2023 is even better than watching it back in the day, because now you're watching it with a new awareness. It's not just a sci-fi dystopian fantasy. It's here. It's around the corner if we're not careful. It's coming.
Yeah, it also makes you appreciate that I could go out today and buy not nice mozzarella and make a lovely pizza while it's still available.
That scene did make me smile when they had that meal.
When they made the stew.
They made the beef stew, and they had a drink of wine, salad.
Never tasted lettuce, because there was no and they had a bottle of whiskey.
Was it whiskey? And he had that bloody bar of soap that they loved.
And he kept going,
washing the hands.
kept smelling the bar of soap.
Yeah.
Because the only way the poor coppers could get anything was to rob crime scenes.
Yeah. Yeah. And in the apartment of Simonson's house, because the girl still stayed there. She was still there waiting for the new tenant, because she was technically part of the furniture. She couldn't leave.
Yeah.
She said to him, stay a bit longer if you want. You can have a shower. We've got hot water. And he's like, you've got hot running water? I've not had a bath or a shower for years, he said. And it was just.
And what are they doing now? They're taking away anything we have. We like.
Yeah.
Just like Soylent Green.
And just like now, when he told the truth and he stood up and he said what he said at the end, I won't say what he said at the end, just in case his people haven't seen it. Everybody looked at him like he was mad. They didn't really believe him. Or if they did believe him, they thought, oh shit, he knows.
Yeah, well, they had people rioting over the Soylent Green not arriving in the quantities. They should have had them rioting over the politicians, not over the lack of Soylent Green. They turned Soylent Green and soil and crackers into a kind of a god they worshipped. It was like a communion host of the dystopian world. Take this body, all of you, and eat from it. There you go.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're Catholic, but when you get communion as a kid, they put the biscuit on the wafer on your tongue, and he says something like "body of Christ," and then you swallow it and say something like "I'm not worthy to receive." It's a horrible ritual.
Had that done once.
I used to feel sick when I was a little boy. That thing in my mouth.
Yeah, I had it done once. Went to a Catholic wedding. It's only a little girl, and we had to put this thing in, and never seen it before because I wasn't brought up in that environment. But we'd gone to this Catholic wedding, and there was a bridesmaid, and they put it. And I said, "What's that?" I actually said, "Ooh, what's that?" And he said, "It's just a wafer." He said, "A piece of bread." So I was like, "Okay." And he put it in, and it stuck to the roof of my mouth.
Yes, it's sticky. Yeah.
Oh,
and yet the thing is, they don't give you any wine. Only the priest gets to drink the wine. I found that kind of like interesting.
yeah, I went to the loo and scraped it off. Got it off. It was awful. It was gagging. It was horrible. Never had it.
We'd always joke about like what we used to call them Jesus crisps and stuff, and what flavor did you get and that kind of thing.
It's bloody awful. Is it bread?
Yeah, it's unleavened bread. It's like a kind of it, and it's weird. And I actually stole a box of them once from some place. I don't know where it was for a laugh. It was in school. There was a box of them left around after some event, and I robbed it, and just laughed it. And there was like thousands of them not the hundreds of them in this box of little kind of things, and it was made in Italy or somewhere like that.
Ooh.
And I had a friend who was an altar boy, and he used to rob the wine, and the wine was horrible. It was no, his brother was an altar boy, and he used to rob the wine. The wine was like strawberry jam with alcohol in it. It wasn't even wine. It was like Buckfast or something like that. Like crap, you know. Night Train in America, Wild Irish Rose, like a wino's wine. That's what it tastes like. Yeah.
That's where the song by Neil Diamond comes from, Crackling Rosie. It was the cheap wine that the tramps could only afford to buy. Yeah.
Yeah, there was 3 or 4 of them in America. There was Wild Irish Rose. That's probably what Crackling Rosie was. There was Thunderbird.
Yeah, we had that here.
and there was Night Train. And I know in Scotland they have Buckfast. I've never tasted that, but they're what they are is like cheap table wine with like a shot of like pure alcohol put in to fortify them.
Thunderbird was bloody lethal. Terrible. Terrible. Oh God. Don't know what.
And there was another one called Schooner. Do you remember that one?
Was that wine?
Yeah, it was like one of those Buckfast type of things, Schooner. The picture of a ship on it. And it was like tramp fuel,
Yeah, no, horrible. I tried to just remember the Thunderbirds. I can still see it now thinking about it. I feel sick. Yeah. See, it was cheap. It was like 99p a bottle.
Yeah, yeah. I've never tasted Buckfast. I think I'm going to buy a bottle just to try it. But like, I have friends in Scotland who say it's like the national drink for teenagers there.
Gosh, I think our national drink for teenagers was Thunderbirds and White Lightning.
Ours was
Diamond White.
Yeah, ours was Flagons of Cider, Woodpecker, Magners, Bulmers, all those things. They were like Linden Village was an Irish one that was like it's still available. That was like teenagers behind us, the parish hall. That was that was me. I didn't drink much as a teenager, but that was my circle, and it was bottles of Linden Village or something like that. Black Sabbath and the Blue Oyster Cult, and just happy days.
Yeah, you just have a swig and pass the bottle around, wouldn't you?
I'd be drunk on that, and also I'd be dry, like I couldn't handle it. It's funny, But that's when I was watching that scene with Thorne, and he never tasted whiskey, and he's taking the bourbon. It reminded me that as a kid, like I got some of my granny sherry, that kind of thing. I stole a bottle of wine from the priest. I'll tell you a terrible story. A friend, and I was telling this to Jerry O'Neill when we were driving through Ballymun after I did the event there a few weeks ago. we went by Our Ladies of Victory's Church on the Collins Avenue, just outside Ballymun. And I had a friend who was a junkie and a heroin junkie, and he needed water to mix the heroin. And he ran into not the Lady of Victory, their Lady's Most Precious Blood, and took the water from the baptismal font to mix the smack. And every time I'm in that part of Dublin and I see that church, I always think of it running out with a plastic cup, baptismal font water, going, I'm fucking sorted. And we're all like, I just go straight to hell by that one.
No, it's holy.
And then he was joking a week later, going, that's the best hit I ever had. I felt like Jesus was going through my veins.
Yeah. Your daddy's heroin blessed.
Oh yeah, we had tremendous fun growing up. And I mean, it's like when you think back on it, it's like we were much freer and happier than kids now. Yeah.
Oh. Holy heroin.
Holy heroin, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that. I can still see him running out. You know those little plastic cups they used to sell? They used to get like orange juice in. It was one of them.
Oh yeah, but you got the straw in.
Yeah, and a silver top.
Yeah.
And he's running out going, I'm fucking sorted. Instead, he disappeared down a laneway, and we figured out what he was doing. We just were laughing for weeks.
Oh. What happened to him?
He died.
Now? Oh, bless. Oh.
He overdosed on the ship. Like even that part was funny. I had to laugh at them. Let's move on.
I hope he went to heaven.
He had lots of fun while he lived, so there you go.
Yeah, live fast, die young.
But he lives through me and through the laughs we had together,
Sorry if you're listening, we're not laughing at you, we're laughing with you.
Yeah. I know he'd be laughing too. And now, if you want to be spiritually clean, emotionally clean, and psychologically clean, so you don't end up running into churches to get water for illegal substances. Here's Sarah with the psychic weather. Psychic hygiene. Here is Sarah with the psychic hygiene.
In our daily lives, we frequently find ourselves in situations where others attempt to provoke or upset us. And this can happen across various settings, whether it's online, at a social event, or even in the workplace. And the impact of such encounters can be profound. And they have the potential to affect our emotional well-being. And we can spend all day playing it over in our heads. And before we realise it, we might find ourselves in heated online debates or feeling deeply hurt and upset by the comments directed at us. And in instances such as these, it is important to recognise the power of detachment. And that doesn't mean becoming apathetic or indifferent, but more about understanding that the opinions, comments, and actions of others shouldn't have the power to define your self-worth or identity. And your sense of self is not solely determined by others. And people perceive the world through their own lens, and it's shaped by their own experiences and beliefs and emotions. So when someone makes a comment or misinterprets your intentions, it can often usually reflect their own perspective and emotional state rather than an actual objective truth. And by detaching, you can avoid taking things personally. And when someone's words trouble you, consider whether their comments are a reflection of your true character or simply a response to their own issues. And instead of reacting impulsively, you can respond thoughtfully or choose not to engage in a heated exchange. And when you refuse to let external judgments define you, you remain true to your values and beliefs, and you're more likely to make decisions and take actions that are more in line with your genuine self rather than reacting to external influences. So you can choose to engage in meaningful conversations and relationships while keeping away from toxic or hurtful individuals. And that makes sure that your psychic space remains protected and positive. And it is a powerful tool for maintaining your peace and self-confidence, even in the face of adversity. You're less likely to be swayed by external opinions and be more capable of making decisions that serve yourself. And I'm going to be candid with you now and tell you that I struggle with this particular suggestion myself. And those who know me personally know that I do really struggle with this, which is what prompted me to write it. And I can assure you that these suggestions don't come from a place of superiority or holier than thou judgment. Mostly they originate from my own struggles that I'm facing in these current times. And I'm far from perfect with this stuff, and I have no shame in admitting it. And anyway, that's my psychic hygiene suggestion for this week.
Yeah, life experience, school of hard knocks, and that old thing, walk a mile in another person's shoes before you actually start judging them from your shoes or whatever. Yeah, it's hard to do, but important thing that, I think we have to be our own arbiter as much as possible. Yeah, I'm terrible at it too as well, probably worse than you, but I'm also a bit of a dick in that I kind of sometimes enjoy it, but I don't set out to hurt people or anything like that. To me, it's kind of like a sport. And I sometimes don't realize I might be hurting people's feelings when I'm having a laugh. And I don't mean to do that, because I'm not a wind-up merchant as such, but I don't run away from a fight, because not because I'm like the aggressive part of it, because I would take the piss further. And sometimes I hurt people when I don't mean to. And so that's something I've had to learn myself, is like, okay, I'm having a laugh here, but it's the person on the other side having a laugh. And I try to pull back then. But I fail sometimes. Like we're but it's self-regulation at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's difficult. So I just thought it'd be an appropriate one because it's something I've been struggling with. So I thought, well, if I'm struggling with it, other people are struggling with it, and it just maybe just scroll on by and don't let it interfere with your day.
Yeah, you have enough problems in your real life anyway. Why do you need, to adopt new ones offline?
I think it was actually it was Olivia that posted a meme about people who take the personalities on social media too seriously because and the meme said I only pop on here for when I'm pooping. Something like that. It was something I only come on when I'm pooping, which is for the majority of people, it's true. You pop on when it's convenient, don't you?
I don't. Anyway. More secrets revealed.
For a lot of people, they do, don't they? They scroll on quickly just to pass a few.
I'm like the referee tonight. Let's stop there.
I will leave it there. Okay.
And the second topic tonight, old school Forteana paranormal, called cryptozoology, or is it? I don't think it is our old friend Bigfoot or Sasquatch, that mysterious ape man, bear man, prototype human being, hybrid, allegedly, of the American wilderness, particularly associated with the Pacific Northwest, but not exclusively. Now, I have a funny relationship with Sasquatch, with Bigfoot, in that I have yet to see any convincing physical evidence of the creature or the entity's existence. But yet I do believe that Bigfoot and Sasquatch exists, based on personal testimonies that are not only compelling and plausible, but they're also highly compatible with each other. I'm going to nail my colours firmly to the mast and declare that I don't believe for a minute that Sasquatch or Bigfoot is an animal, I believe it is either an interdimensional entity or an American fairy of the Pacific forests and other forests around the Canada and the US. And that was basically what the Native Americans, First Nations people said about it. And I'm still in that, very much in that ballpark. Why do I believe there's no physical evidence? Quite a few things. Now, when people think of Bigfoot, the most famous piece of so-called evidence is the Patterson-Gimli film. That famous film of a guy called Patterson and Gimli. Two guys were riding in the woods and they saw the Bigfoot walking away. And the film has been used as conclusive proof that they actually caught a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot on film. In the years since, through technology and video processing, especially when you see it AI stabilized now, it's clearly a man in a monkey suit. This is compounded by the fact that because of the frame rate of the camera, people used to say it was impossible for humans to make that kind of articulation with their joints when they walked. And then loads of fellas got into monkey suits and proved that you could walk like that. It was just an urban legend thing. I believe the Patterson-Gimli film is an absolute fake, but with a caveat or a proviso. I believe that Patterson and Gimli did believe that Bigfoot was a real creature, that they had seen the real thing, but were under tremendous pressure to produce evidence for it, that they faked it. How did they fake it? Patterson was an opportunist. He was basically the one who, he was the Bigfoot what Eric von Daniken was to Ancient Aliens. He was the ground zero that really pushed it off. And he wrote a book about encounters with Sasquatch or encounters with Bigfoot that was quite a big seller in its time. And he decided he wanted to be the Bigfoot guy, the Sasquatch guy. In fact, at one point, he even tried to copyright, and I don't know if it happened, the Bigfoot name. So he went down to Hollywood to try to market the idea for a documentary film. There was very popular documentary films at the time in Hollywood on paranormal topics, and hosted by people like Leonard Nimoy or William Shatner, that kind of thing, or Rod Serling. And he went down there, and it just so happened that the people he met and the studios he was at were the same people making the Planet of the Apes movies. And he had access to the prosthetics and these high quality suits that they were used in the Planet of the Apes movie. And it is quite likely he got his hands on one of these suits. Him and Gimli, and maybe Gimli didn't know it was happening. Maybe he was fooled him, and he had somebody walk and filmed it and made it look like it was a surprise. And the sensation kicked off. Over the years, they show things like footprints, whichever it's very strange. They only ever show one footprint. It's never two or anything. And the so-called lines and ridges in they can be caused by mud drying out and everything like that. And the footprints, now there's two interesting points here. The footprints, you never see a long trail of footprints. You do with the Yeti, interestingly, in the Himalayas, but you never do with Bigfoot. And there's lots of reasons for that, but it could be that if it was a real physical creature, that the footprints are just going from mud into twigs. But there doesn't seem to be a good consistency. There has been some very dubious DNA evidence. One was that someone had claimed that a piece of hair they'd pulled from a tree trunk purported to be a piece of Bigfoot fur or hair. So it contained the DNA that was half human and half bear. So this thing arose that it was a bear human hybrid. It was obviously the hairs of a bear that had been contaminated by the person that picked it up. And that's why it had both DNA. So there's always these red herrings put out there. The compelling testimonies is people having encountered them firsthand and saying remarkable things about them, like there was almost a spiritual effect when they saw it. Some people have shot at it and not killed it. The bullets went right through it as if it wasn't there. They were just seeing a mirage or something. Another aspects was the sounds, which are very similar to this. You hear start with banshees and stuff like that. There was huge amounts of people have seen it. And I believe that many of those accounts are legit. Why haven't they shot one and brought a sample back home? Well, there's a very good reason for this. They could be charged with murder if it was a person in a monkey suit and they accidentally shot them. Also, there's the element of why was there no bodies ever found or bones? Well, anyone who knows anything about the wild knows that if something falls down the forest, within no time, the body is stripped to the ground, to nothing, down to the bones by animals, and then the bones are carried off by foxes and everything else to get the marrow out of them. So that's why when people vanish in the woods and say, all these people have vanished in the woods and not a trace of them has ever been found, that's because their bodies have been taken by predators who've just eaten them up in no time and carried the bones off. And that's why they don't find them. And that's why we never found Bigfoot. My theory is, and I strongly believe this, is that Bigfoot is an interdimensional elemental thing, almost certainly a fairy. Now, you would say, well, I don't expect a fairy to look like that. If you lived in Europe, people of North America, our fairies come in all shapes and sizes, all types, and some of them are all humanoid. There's also animal type fairies as well. So it manifests probably in that form, because that's what people expect, the wild man of the woods. And in fact, they were called woodland wild men or woodland. If you look at the older reports going back pre-Patterson Gimli time, way back into like near colonial America, they talk not about a wild man of the woods, but a strange phantom of the woods. The language is less cryptozoology and more fairy, interdimensional, paranormal, ghost-like. Now, Bigfoot, again, there's no evidence, but there's no hard evidence for fairies either. But yet, people see them. I know people have had incredible visual experiences, and I know they're telling the truth. And they've seen the green. I know someone who saw the Green Man. I know someone who saw Pan, and they were not lying. They were telling the truth, absolutely 100%. But you could never get physical evidence of these. So is there any footage out there that's real? Yes, on my Beyond Room 213 channel, there's a police footage of a dash cam. I think it's filmed. I don't know where in the US it was filmed. But you see it in its interdimensional form, almost like a mist. Very similar to many ghost footage. The police officers saw the Bigfoot at the side of the road, instantly turned around. It's all caught on the dash cam. Drove back to the exact location where it was. And just before he gets there, a strange body of light, moving like a human would, ghostly, runs from one side of the road to the other. The copper is startled. He jumps out, looks around, and made a report that he'd seen a Sasquatch. And he said it kind of vanished. And I think that's one of the few videos. There's also another video, which was, this is the weird thing about paranormal videos. Over the years, I've seen paranormal videos on TV shows, news reports that were very compelling, and they never showed up on the internet or they're scrubbed from the internet. One was a TV show I saw, an afternoon TV show I saw in Ireland, where a woman produced the most spectacular ghost quotation footage you could ever imagine. She was filming her kids at a beach somewhere in Northern Ireland, and suddenly this pixelated person starts walking towards the camera like that. And on camera, while she's filming, going, I think I'm videoing a ghost. They didn't see it. And then the thing just vanished. You cannot find that anywhere. And there's also one Bigfoot footage I saw from, I think it was one of those, it was either Discovery, no, it wasn't, it was a British channel. It was like Live Bravo or Lifestyle. I had a paranormal show back in the early 2000s when I still had cable. And they had a very good documentary on the Bigfoot thing, and they did cover the fact that it might be actually a fairy type, interdimensional too. This video was remarkable. It showed what looked like your classic, there's people having a barbecue, filming the family on the side of a hill in Washington State. Someone shouts up and goes, is that a bear? Like they're a bit nervous that there's something charging along the hill. You see what is the classic Bigfoot. And it's pretty clear, running at a speed that's much faster than a human can run. Like you're talking about Usain Bolt, cross like rough ground, right? And then they show the film, and the film, it seems to look like it's pulling an infant Bigfoot and putting it on its shoulders. It changes, and the head is suddenly up here, and that's the way you see it. And then I kept playing the video back, and the thing is shape shifting. It's changing shape, which is a classic fairy thing, interdimensional thing. And you cannot find that. I've searched high and low, and I cannot find that video anywhere now. Because one, Bigfoot true believers, and I spent a lot of time when I was researching my own Bigfoot documentary on their groups, are absolutely, like, the UFO people are completely convinced it's aliens and it's about spaceships from other worlds. The Bigfoot people cannot get although there's a growing movement in America and Canada now looking at it a spiritual way. They call it the spiritual Bigfoot groups, but it's nearly always the Patterson Gimli film is absolute proof. It's a bear type person, it's an ape type man, and it's a cryptozoology thing. They cannot grasp it, and so those kinds of videos, they ignore them because they're too weird, they're too strange, because they show shape shifting. Even though it was a very good quality video, when you zoomed in, it was pretty good. Like, it wasn't just a fuzzy dot or anything like that. Coupled with the fact that I believe there are vested interests out there that don't want us to see really good paranormal footage, no matter what it is. And when it gets out there, it's almost like a memo goes out saying, hide it. I really do believe that. And I saw proof of that with the famous Gettysburg Ghost videos, where the couple are sitting on their porch just filming on it, and suddenly see these lights that look like horsemen, almost like the elves in Lord of the Rings leaving Middle Earth towards the Grey Havens, and coming down a hill, and the people are going, what is that? It looks, the lights are moving like they're people walking, and that was compelling footage as well. That's kind of like was all, no one talks about that. It's all played down and everything. It's almost like really good footage is played down and fake shit is put into the front. And Bigfoot's there's loads of films of fellas like, the amount of fakery is unbelievable in the Bigfoot world. And they're all Patterson Gimli's. Well, Patterson's anyway. They're desperate to try and, we can't get it, we'll fake it just to prove it exists in our minds. And that's because they don't accept what I believe Bigfoot to be. It's an interdimensional American, Canadian woodland spirit / fairy. And it appears in that guise, just like the Native Americans, First Nations people said it was. So what do you think, Sarah?
Pretty much the same as you. I'm aware that Bigfoot has its origins in Native American lore, and the creature's always described as being between 6 and 10 feet tall, and it's covered with hair. And the Sioux know the entity as, and I do apologise for my pronunciation, I'll put it on the screen. They know the entity as the Kiai-Tanka. Now, I may have said that wrong. I will put that on the screen. Anyway, it translates to big elder brother. And it's said that the creatures are generally harmless unless they're threatened, and they live deep in the woods and they forage for plants and food by night, but they're afraid of humans. And there's also other Native American legends that say the creatures like to mate with female humans, and they may even abduct them. As well as small children who are then raised in the woods and they're never seen again, a bit like the fairies. And maybe that is what they are. They could be fairies of a big hairy fairy. It's also said that in some legends they might also attack or kill or eat people, or play tricks on a village to encourage the people to make war on a neighbouring community. And people often think of the Bigfoot legends as only coming from the early 20th century, but the Native American stories regarding the same entity are most likely to be thousands of years old and were being told long before the first Europeans ever came to North America. So I definitely believe it is a fairy.
Years ago, somebody overlaid a geological survey map of the US in different regions, in areas with high levels of Bigfoot sightings, and they were generally in areas with high levels of quartz. I found that very interesting. Quartz seems to affect human consciousness, and that's why it's used in a lot of megaliths and a lot of healing and stuff like that. Another interesting one about the Sasquatch Bigfoot thing is that many people, not there are many UFO abductions and UFO stories around Bigfoot. That when Bigfoot is seen, it's sometimes seen during a UFO flap. Remember when I covered the Bridgewater Triangle there once, and it's also in the upcoming book. That's in Massachusetts now, on the other side of America, and they have Bigfoot type encounters and Mothman, which is also, I believe, a similar thing, and UFOs at the same time. And even more amazing, there's lots of people who claim to have had UFO abductions and been on the spaceship and saw Bigfoot in the spaceship, what they thought was the spaceship inside the craft. That's actually surprisingly common. Again, that's a fairy thing to me as far as I'm concerned. And a lot of people dream of Bigfoots. Bigfoot appears in people's dreams a lot. It's a common dream character that appears in them. So that's also very interesting too. So there's very little evidence. So there's no evidence really that it's a flesh and blood creature, just like there's no evidence that UFOs are nuts and bolts spacecraft. But there's colossal amounts of evidence in both cases that they're more of what we'd call a spiritual or supernatural, non-material phenomena. And you have, again, a vested interest who seem to want to lock you into these belief packages, which are, it's many scientists, if you approach like many scientists and biologists in America about Bigfoot, they'll say, well, there's no proof that, but if it does exist, it's a hybrid human, or it's an early proto-human or some kind of ape. So, so that they're very comfortable with the idea of the researchers looking for a missing ape, because it's not that spooky. It's just nature, It's like the Tasmanian devil. It's an animal that doesn't exist anymore. But things get real weird when you talk about it in the other level, in the other light. It's like in the olden days of ufology, when people would start talking about, I don't think what I saw was an actual machine. The lights in the sky looked like an animal. It looked like it was alive, had a conscience. Next thing you know, there's men in black knocking on doors. This kind of thing. Like, it's like when they start to look at the real thing, what it could be the real thing, they have these other, that's so weird. Something moved down my hallway. They have this hit the corner of my eye, like it was very strange. Now this other experience, the same way too, and these sort of like experiences happen. So again, I'm a big believer in Bigfoot Sasquatch. I'm a big believer in that these many people seeing are absolutely telling the truth, but the entire narrative is just like the UFO alien thing, is skewed by vested interests who have a reason. In the case of UFOs, the governments don't know what they are, and they're only now beginning to admit that, because it might be useful to their Project Bluebeam. And in the case of Bigfoot Sasquatch, they want you to believe it's an animal because they couldn't explain it if it was something else. Yeah, that's it. I mean, that's Bigfoot to me, and I think that's a Bigfoot is typical of a lot of the subjects in the alternative, in the paranormal, is that people get locked into stereotypes that were set in stone, and then, like for instance, like instead of starting with a blank slate, I'm going to be a UFO. I'm going to be a Bigfoot researcher, so I'm going to go to the woods and look for the creature that Patterson Gimlin filmed, rather than going into the woods and saying, I haven't got a clue what this thing is, but I'm going to look for something, and I'm open to everything. The big problem, ghost hunters, UFO people, everything. So many of them are, they're like that. They're stuck in stereotypes. And that's the difference between a paranormal researcher and a Fortean researcher. I think a paranormal researcher is locked in, this is a ghost, this is absolutely a spaceman, this is absolutely a crypto animal, where a Fortean is more likely, hold on a second, there are maybe way many different things, aspects to that. And they're all, and even if it's fake, it's interesting.
I know there's been loads and loads of searches for Bigfoot, and been loads of field investigations and setting up camera traps and audio recordings to capture like sounds and things like that. But and there's been some interesting recordings and footprints over the years, but there's never been any definitive proof. And I think, and just to echo what you said, I think that is because it is not of this world. It's more likely to be
Yes.
spiritual in nature. And in fact, after reading about the Native American legends, I'm even more convinced it is some kind of fae that's tied to the land over there. And then, like they say, Bigfoot is a prime example of a cryptid. And I hate that word, cryptid. I run away from
Yeah.
it, not because I'm frightened of it, but I just
It's lazy. It's lazy. And also another thing too, there are millions of trail cams in America. Millions. It's a big hobby there to go into the woods, set up a trail cam, collect the disc a week later, and look to see if they get lovely shots of deer or mountain lions or other bears and wildlife footage. Not one of the millions of trail cams has ever picked up a Bigfoot, day or night. So that tells you. Now, while there is vast wilderness still in the United States, that's like one of the myths about the United States is that it's all been explored. No, there are probably hundreds of thousands of square miles in America below that forest canopy that's no one's been to, or they passed through once, or it's just not been properly looked into. America has vast remote regions still. Even states like Maine and New Hampshire will have their upstate New York are places that like humans just don't go into. So what was the Pacific Northwest, the Cascades, and those regions like the Sierra Nevadas and those vast forests there. So this is nonsense that every part of America. I'll be a bit controversial here. There's a guy called David Paulus in America who's made a bit of a name for himself with these missing 411 books. And I haven't read any of his books, but I've listened to quite a lot of his talks online. And this guy says absolutely nothing. All he does, it's really strange. All he does is report missing people that went missing in the woods. It's a very easy thing to go missing in the woods. You could go hiking, break a leg, get eaten by a bear, and like I said, your body would disappear in no time. And he seems to have built this whole following up of these books. And he never comes to any conclusions. He never puts out theories. And somehow it's taken over the whole Bigfoot paranormal thing in America. And it's a whole pile of nothing. It's just lists of people who vanished. But people vanish all the time in the vast woodlands of America and national parks. That wouldn't be surprising at all. Well, it's this missing 411 thing. It's like literally, it's like a massive scene in America of nothing. There's no payoff. Now, a good story is Travis Walton, Fire in the Sky, a very frightening movie. I met Travis Walton at an event in Texas about 6 or 7 years ago. And I and a lovely man, I got talking to him. I totally believe his story completely. I mean, even the police do and everybody. And I said to him, and he was looking at my T-shirt, and we got chatting, and he was looking at it had like runes, and it was like a Viking type thing. And he said he really liked Nordic stuff and Viking art, Celtic artwork. And he said he looked, he's really interested in Celtic art, blah blah blah. And he'd go to see Ireland one day. And I said to him, "Do you ever think that we experience could be fairy? It could have been a fairy thing rather than an alien thing." And he just looked at me like that, and he goes, "Yeah, it's a possibility." So that's how he's at the real thing, because even he's still not sure. And you see him on Joe Rogan, the man's extremely sincere, but you have a narrative where it has to be aliens, and it's the same thing with the Bigfoot. It has to be Bigfoot, and this missing 411 thing by David Paulus seems to tie into it, and it's got this weird loop around it where when I was investigating the Manchester pusher thing, he started claiming that the Manchester pusher victims were part of the same phenomena. It's just weird stuff, that kind of a thing. He kind of like built an industry on but when you listen to his videos, like, you're waiting for this payoff, okay, and they're missing because, and then people that defend him say, "Oh, he's just a documenter of missing people." So why is it on paranormal stuff? It's just all he's doing is reading up police reports. So I'm not putting the guy down. He's entitled to do his whole thing. I just don't understand the attraction it has for all these people, or some similar spellbound by it, because it's a go nowhere thing, And if you go to American paranormal or 14 bookshops, they have huge sections on this 411 stuff. And it's just strange. It's I know there are fads and there are trends within the occult, but and he's one of them. But his work is one of them. But I don't even see it as being paranormal or Fortean. It's just police reports. And then people say, well, you make up your own conclusions. Well, why does it even exist then? Why is it even important? Why are we pushed with it? And this is the whole thing. It's like so many paranormal Fortean, well, not say Fortean, paranormal people only want to go so far. Do you ever notice that? And when you want to take them to the next level, well, could it be this? You don't always get the kind of polite answer that you get from Travis Walton. At the same event in Texas, I got talking to two ghost hunters and said to them, do you ever think they could be demons? And they went, it was like, it was that cognitive dissonance. You could actually see the shut off, that whole thing. And when I made the documentary on Bigfoot, that was a lot of comments. How dare you not believe Patterson Gimli film? Like it was sacred scripture. But that only makes me believe more that my theory is right.
I'm not sure whether or not any so-called cryptids have actually been seen and identified as such for real and logged as a new species. I haven't looked, I haven't researched that, as I've always thought.
Well, the Tasmanian
creatures and yetis, they're from spiritual realms.
There have been animals that were considered one time mythical. Elephants in Europe in the Tudor period didn't believe them. And they had read stories about Hannibal, and there was even all paintings. They looked like dinosaurs, actually, the elephants, and the way they're painted, because they didn't really know what they looked like. And gorillas is a famous one. No one believed gorillas existed until one was captured. And they would hear stories. Like the African folks would say, "Oh, up in the jungle, there's men. They're hairy, and they're called gorillas, whatever." And the Europeans said, "You're making it up." And even when the Europeans got back and they said there's apes, and they're like men that live in the mountains in Africa, and they're called gorillas, and they were like, get out. And it wasn't until one was actually brought back that people believe it. So that's definitely a crypto thing. That's true. But I don't believe the Loch Ness Monster is an animal. I don't believe Bigfoot is an animal. I don't believe lots of them are animals. I think they are, they're some kind of interdimensional thing. I really do. But I don't even, like you said, when I hear the word cryptozoology, I kind of turn off it, doesn't it?
No, it doesn't interest me from a cryptozoology point of view. Even the word just makes me want to turn away.
Yeah, and then there's things like giant sea serpents. So I have an old dictionary that talks about sea serpents actually existing. And now you don't hear about them anymore. And also there's giant squids. Well, they've been found, but they're not like the way they've been described. They may well exist. The ocean is still a lot down there we don't know about. But the Bigfoot thing it's a kind of a tragic one, because I think of a lot of people were actually to take their conventional view of it out of there would actually get a lot more satisfaction from exploring it. I'm very interested in how it affects the people who see it. Why do they have dreams about it? Why if you saw an unknown ape man in Washington or upstate or California or somewhere up around Eureka in the woods, why would you have strange dreams about it? This is what takes it out of if you saw an animal for the first time you never saw before, you wouldn't have weird dreams where it's trying to communicate to you in dreams.
I wonder if it is trying to communicate with you telepathically or subconsciously. And I wonder if Bigfoot is a mischievous entity that plays around with people on purpose, knowing the divide and the arguments, its existence or non-existence.
Well, definitely some things look like trickster type playing. Standing at the side of busy highways, making sure that's happened quite a lot, where it's busy highways in California or in upstate in Washington State or in Oregon, where the thing is standing at the side of the road and hundreds of people see it as they're driving by. And when one person stops, it vanishes into thin air. That's definitely sounds, it's not a fella in a monkey suit because it vanishes. That set definitely sounds like it's having fun.
Yeah, my opinion, my conclusion on it, from my own point of view, is it's a mischievous, hairy fairy that likes to play games with people, and depending on how open-minded you are, I think is how much it's willing to play games with you.
I would agree with that in principle, but I also think there's a deeply spiritual experience to it as well that the First Nation and Native American people tapped into. So I'd be between both of them, but absolutely, I don't believe it's a missing monkey man.
Maybe it has more respect for the ancient, for the Native American people because they're tied to the land too.
Maybe it's like I always said. Would Ireland, and I wrote about it in an upcoming book, would the fairies of Ireland be less hostile to Irish people if we were not Christians and we're still pagans?
Yeah.
Same thing. So that's Bigfoot Sasquatch. If you have any views on the hairy fairy or the cryptozoology ape man, let us know. It's a far more interesting subject than a lot of people think it's cliched. If you think I'm talking shy about the David Paul is missing 411 stuff and want to correct me on that, that's what you're there for. And that's it. That's Bigfoot to me. It's the American woodland fairy or the airy fairy trickster of what Sarah says. But I do think there's a strong spiritual component to it because of the dreaming and how Native Americans talk about it. Until we go back to Sasquatch again, to the subject, let us know how you feel, and we'll cover it again down the road with new theories and ideas.
Yeah, and let us know if you've seen the sassy hairy fairy.
Yeah, as opposed to ginger fairy.
Yeah, I'm a ginger fairy. I'm allowed to call it a hairy fairy. Thomas is the man with the psychic weather reading for the upcoming atmospheric quirks of our collective mood, and it's the forecast you absolutely can't afford to miss. So without further ado, here is Thomas with the psychic weather.
The psychic weather this week is a funny one. It seems to be like inverted Midas touch. I've been reading, friends online have been telling me that everything they tried to do falls apart or breaks. Same here. Everything I've been trying to work on has fallen apart the last few days. I've seen road crews working on the roads, and they seem to be in a state where everything is breaking and not working for them. And I'm seeing people in supermarkets dropping things, and I saw a guy stacking shelves and the whole thing fell over. And there's also seems to be a lot, and people seem genuinely upset, or it's a weird kind of feeling. And so it's like what people talk about with the Mercury retrograde, where you expect your appliances to break and stuff. I know we're not in that now, but it seems to be like that, a kind of a mini version of that. So expect appliances to stop working, things you're working on not to just to work out, break as you're doing them, and to be upset about it, feel a bit down about it, and frustrated. And that's a psychic weather this week, inverted Midas touch.
I've not had anything like that happen so far this week, but I'm just going to, it did bring something back to memory. Do you remember a few months ago, it was Monday, it was a Monday, we were due to film in the evening, and I was like, yep, I'll see you at the usual time, I'm all ready. I got everything done for that episode, and the bloody document just disappeared. I had to message him and say, I'm sorry, I've lost everything, can't do the show. It just disappeared from the computer.
The council were cutting hedges and the machine was broken down. And you could see them. They wanted to get it done and finished. And the guy was like trying to work on the machine. And then the truck came along and hauled it away. At the same time, a dozen things I'm working on. I was putting some new artwork in frames. half the frame smashed, or had problems with them that didn't fit. And I was reading comments online the last 2 days, and everyone was saying the same. It's just like everything's like really like dysfunctional, and it makes them feel upset. I felt very upset, frustrated, and yeah, it's I don't know what it is, but I've decided I'm not going to work on anything physical like right for a day or two, and just like concentrate on the theater of the mind. And that's yeah.
I like that, theatre of the mind.
It comes from Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
That's how it originally started. It started out in the theater before you had the miniatures and the scenery and the boards. It was a sheet of pen and paper, and it was in the theater of the mind.
Cool. Sounds like a great name for a channel, that.
That was great because everyone pictured the fantasy world and the dungeon crawling in their heads. That's and you'd say this, that, and the other happened, but we'd all imagine it inside our heads. That's when it was that's when it was black magic, actually.
But yeah, the theatre of the mind, pen and paper, and you can't go wrong if
Yeah,
things
yeah,
start
yeah.
breaking.
Yeah,
I've learned that lesson.
a lot of people will be stepping on their kids' Legos into their bare feet in the next few days, I reckon.
Yeah, so keep your slippers on or your shoes on.
Or put the Lego away and give Junior some pencil and crayons.
As we turn the page to this week's book review section, we are once again sharing a peek into our reading realm. Our bookshelves over the years have become portals to encounters with the other worlds, magical realms, and all things Fortean. Like a finely aged whiskey, our bookshelves get better as the years go by, and we hope to inspire you for your next edition to help fill your bookshelves with top-notch content. And my book this week is In God's Name by David Yallop. And it's an investigative book surrounding the mysterious death of Pope John Paul I in 1978. And Albino Luciani, known as the Smiling Pope, died after only 33 days into his papacy. He introduces you to the Vatican's inner workings and all the complex dynamics that govern the world's smallest sovereign state. With a Pope who was believed to be a beacon of reform and transparency, his sudden death sent shockwaves throughout the Catholic Church and through the world. And from financial scandals to shadowy figures within the Vatican to the P2 Masonic Lodge, Yallop presents a compelling case that Pope John Paul I was assassinated. And he also delves into Albino Luciani's stance on birth control and his potential willingness to reconsider the position established in Humanae Vitae. And the Vatican had initially advocated the use of the rhythm method for married couples as a solution to birth control issue, but Luciani had reservations about its effectiveness and expressed his doubts. And when he took the papacy, he confided in his secretary, who was a cardinal, and he said, "What do we elderly men truly understand about the intimate desires of married couples?" And the author goes on with his investigation into the global implications of the Catholic Church's inner workings and the significant influence that the papacy has not only over the religious landscape, but also in political circles marked by corruption, betrayal, and murder, which were all events that were taking place even before the Pope's untimely demise. And there are revelations in the book of the Vatican's complicated financial operations and clandestine manoeuvres, even siphoning off of funds and the collapse of the banks in Italy and beyond. And the book's not just an investigation. I think it's a real life thriller that keeps you on the edge of your seat. And I think In God's Name is a tour de force of investigative journalism, and it's a must read for anyone intrigued by the connections of power, secrecy, and faith. And it took me a long time to read this book. It's not a quick read or something you can rush, and it takes time to digest it all. And you need to put a lot of concentration into it because it really makes you think, and it changes so many perceptions of one of the most powerful institutions in the world. And even after reading it, and really concentrating on it, it's something that I will return to as a reference book, because there's so much information in it, it's just impossible to retain it all to memory. And it's an amazing read that should be included in any serious Fortean library.
Yeah, it's a masterpiece. It's a book. Anyone who doesn't believe in conspiracies, it's a book to give them and goes, well, there it is. There it is, all in black and white. And the book is so well written and so intriguing when it goes into Propagandae Due and the whole concept of how the entire Italian government at the time was literally in this Freemasonic lodge. Billy Meep loves it, in this Freemasonic lodge called Propagandae Due, who wanted to retake Italy as a fascist Catholic dictatorship, basically. And Calvi's murder at Greyfriars Bridge wasn't the only thing. The two fellas that were believed to assassinate him were found dead a few weeks in an apartment, each separately in Soho. The whole tie-in with the Grand Masonic Lodge, the fact that Prince Philip's personal surgeon was the one brought in to do the autopsy on Roberto Calvi and said that nothing was wrong. It is one of the greatest books ever written. It's there would be no Da Vinci Code or any of those things if it wasn't out there, and it's an absolute unmitigated masterpiece. And if anyone ever says to you there's no such thing as conspiracy, you hand them in God's name and say, right, put that where the sun don't shine. My book is the Twilight of Pluto, Astrology and Planet, the Rise and Fall of Planetary Influences by John Michael Greer. I just finished this and it's great. It talks about, and I'm really getting into this guy's books and writing. He's kind of replaced. I have to put Billy Meek down. He loves the 40 and stuff, but yes, I'll play with you later. He's kind of replaced Colin Wilson for me, the late great Colin Wilson. And he's got loads of books out there. I love his website, and he talks about he makes astrology so believable to the layperson, and he shows how he uses basically this book, and it's a quick read. He shows how the planet Pluto affected changes in society from its discovery to the day they decided it wasn't a planet. And he showed things like how it affected modern art, psychology and psychoanalysis, everything. So many cultural changes in the world. But he also shows how other planets and other changes in astrology and cosmology affected society. For instance, he speculates through someone else's work, and he agrees with it, that the discovery of the planets, the 7 objects in the sky, which would be the 5 classical planets, Mars, Venus, Mercury, Saturn, and Jupiter, plus Earth and the Moon and the Sun, gives you the 7. This discovery that they were in different orbits than the stars probably kickstarted the Neolithic age and the age of agriculture and the rise of the megaliths. And likewise, the discovery of Uranus and Neptune led to the Enlightenment and not just the Protestant Enlightenment, but also the European Catholic Enlightenment, like Napoleonic codes and stuff, under the discovery of them, as well as the scientific methods, the age of the reason, and so on. And he shows that there's usually a foreshadowing right before it happens. So, for instance, Lovecraft predicted Pluto a few years before it gave it a name and everything, and Yogati called it, and other things like that too. And he shows that Pluto's a good example because it was a planet for a long time, and then they decided it wasn't a planet. It's really small, Pluto, smaller than our moon, and there's also a planet beyond it that's actually even bigger, that's not included. So, and how the discovery and the downgrading affected affairs, human psychology, consciousness, and affairs on Earth. And I have to say, it made a very plausible argument for me. And I have I can't disagree with his overall thesis. So yeah, recommended, quick read, real fast. Who knows, you could read on a long train journey. The Twilight of Pluto, Astrology and the Rise and Fall of the Planetary Influences, John Michael Greer. The second of his books I've reviewed on Hocus Pocus. I'd previously done his Monsters book, and between this and his website, I like the man's work and the cut of his jib.
So does he go into astrology, or is he just talking about the planets, or does he actually go into the charts and everything?
Yeah, he goes into classical astrology, yeah.
Right.
So he basically, the book is basically a primer for the legitimacy of astrology.
So it's a good one to read.
But it's more than that. It's not an astrology book. It's almost like astrology is real because this stuff happens in space.
Right.
At the same time, this stuff happens on Earth.
So as above, so below.
Precisely, yeah. And I like the way he writes, and he's full of interesting tidbits, and is like Colin Wilson. It could read a chapter, and the chapter throws you off in a new angle of discovery and interest. So that's why Colin Wilson sadly missed, but I think John Michael Greer kind of fills that void for me now.
That's high praise indeed.
Yeah.
We've come to the end of the episode, and thank you as always for watching. And don't forget to keep sending your ideas, location reports, news stories. We do love hearing from you and reading all the comments. And the comment section is there for you to carry on the conversation. So please do continue to leave your comments and feedback on the show. Now, I'm also in the process of designing a Christmas jumper for the Hocus Focus shop, as well as changing up the original design a little bit on the men's t-shirts to reflect the logo more as a crest on the chest, like what you see on a football shirt. And that was Thomas's idea about that. So I'm going to make it a little bit more subtle for the male t-shirts. So again, leave me your thoughts on that in the comments regarding a Christmas jumper. Would you guys wear a Hocus Focus Christmas jumper? Please do let me know. And I think Thomas has a little announcement for next Sunday, because it's a bit of a change next Sunday.
Yeah, well, I don't know if there's going to be a show next week, because I know there's no going to Hocus Focus because Sarah's away. But I think I might do some kind of live stream or something different, or some kind of video, just to fill in an hour or two of where Sarah's away, basically on the Italian job, and I will get you something. Leave it with me, and that's basically it. I'm a bit more caustic than Sarah. I would like to say something about what she said at the beginning of the show about people who unsubscribed. Goodbye. Sarah, what's the tarot card this week?
Yes, you threw me. Let me get it. See, you're the yin to my yang, Thomas.
That's right. Yep.
So the tarot card for this week is the Page of Pentacles. And it's associated with the element of earth. And in the card, we see a young person dressed in earthy green and brown tones, standing in a field and holding a large pentacle or coin with both hands. And the page is focused on the pentacle, and he's studying it intently. And his focus on it can also show a meticulous approach to life. And this may well be a time when you're delving into the finer points of your own psychology or intricacies of your personality. And the landscape around him is very fertile, with sprouting plants and a well-ploughed field, which indicates the potential for growth and material abundance. And if you're prepared to put the work in, that's what will come. And the pentacles in the tarot hold dominion over the material realm and are connected to the earth. And so the Page of Pentacles is an awareness of the value of money, wealth, possessions, career pursuits, and physical well-being. Now, from a divinatory standpoint, the card could mean changing your job or your line of work or the beginnings of a new venture. It's also a card of learning, the card of the student, and there may be an opportunity to learn a new skill, or you might be more focused on a particular area of study that you want to improve. It might be a new project or a skill that you want to develop further. So it could be the time to consider looking at taking on a course or a class in your chosen field. There's also the need with this card for grounding and paying attention to the physical world, and perhaps focusing on your finances, work, or health at this time. And that fertile landscape in the card is all about the potential for growth and abundance. So be open to opportunities that may lead to material and personal success. But remember, you need actions for plans. They will not manifest by clicking your heels or squeezing your buttocks. You need to put in place clear plans for achieving your dreams and goals. So stay focused on the practical and tangible elements. The youthful and eager energy of the page will be an asset during this phase, but remember to pay attention to detail. And just to round it off, in a Jungian context, this card could signify a phase of self-discovery and integration of different aspects of your own psyche. So be open to learning more about yourself and bringing the hidden or repressed elements of your personality into conscious awareness. Bit like in the psychic hygiene when I was talking about dealing with toxic people and nasty comments, if that's something that you struggle with. The Page of Pentacles is a reminder that the journey towards self-realization and wholeness is an ongoing process.
Consider the way he's looking at the coin. It's like Charlie that got the golden ticket from the Wonka bar. He is, but it's not like shock or surprise. He's looking at it in such a way that he has discovered the potential of money. He has figured out that money is not the root of all evil or something that just is used as a commercial thing. He's discovered that money is psychic energy held within an object, and it has a magical and a powerful force connected to it. That he's seeing the coin not as a monetary thing you buy sweets in the shop with, but an actual talisman to actually grow. This is one of the reasons I always believe there'll be some form of cash in circulation, because the coin of the realm and the king shilling is an integral part of the magic of money. And he's discovered, the page is discovering that money is a lot more than just something you buy stuff with or save up. It has a psychic potential inherent within it. And so this is a very good card for opening a bank, your first bank account for a young person, learning to budget in a sensible way, where here's the important thing. You don't live with poverty consciousness where you penny pinch and you itemize everything in your shopping list. You'll never, ever have any money. You'll always be broke no matter how much you get. But if you develop an attitude that money is captured psychic energy, and I wouldn't say spend it laissez-faire, but not have a fear connected to it, money will grow. It wants you to enjoy it. It wants you to not live in fear of it. So this whole thing of people who say things like money is the root of all evil and all this kind of stuff, they're completely wrong. There's a magic and a spiritual energy to coins and cash. That's why it's been around 6,000 years. It works. And when you don't have poverty consciousness, what he's learning this now, that money can work for me, because it's a rolling stone of psychic energy. And that's the way you look at it. It's a talisman. So it's a great card in many ways for teaching about, instead of being afraid of money, learn to understand that money there's a reason why there's a coin or a pentacle on the magician's table. Absolutely.
Money is energy, and it's not the root of all evil. It's a tool. It's what you do with it. And it's energy as well. So you need to respect it, and just like any energy, really. And if you respect it, more of it tends to come to you. But if you are afraid of it, or you treat it with scarcity, or you think it's the root of all evil,
Yeah,
that's the energy that you're going to attract back, and that's what you'll find in
yeah.
your world that it is. So just treat it with respect, spend it wisely, use it wisely, and use it to do nice things, use it to do good in the world.
Literally enrich yourself with it psychically, and don't have this poverty consciousness thing is a terrible, because the person who's obsessed and miserly and counts every penny, you know, this whole thing we were brought up with, oh, the reason why the rich are rich is because they count every penny. No, the reason why the rich are rich is because they've lost their fear of being poor. You remember that. Good night, everybody.
Good night and stay strange.